Chapter 27, Strained Trust. The morning sun struggled to break through the dense canopy of trees, casting a pale, diffused light that filtered softly onto the ground of their temporary camp. The air was heavy with the dampness of the night, and a cool breeze rustled the leaves, but the quietness felt almost unnatural. Adrian and Serena sat a short distance apart, their bodies weary from the strain of their journey. The peacefulness of the reef, with its vibrant greenery and the rhythmic sound of distant waves, stood in stark contrast to the tension that simmered between them. The weight of their mission, the heartstone they carried, and the challenges still to come filled the air with an unspoken heaviness. While the world around them seemed calm, within their hearts, turmoil brewed. Adrian's thoughts were a whirlwind, his mind constantly circling the impending ritual and the potential consequences of failure. He had seen the dangers the Heartstone could invoke, felt its immense power firsthand, but he couldn't shake the nagging fear that even with the artifact in their possession, success was not guaranteed. Serena, too, was wrestling with doubt. Though she remained resolute on the outside, her eyes betrayed a flicker of uncertainty. The weight of what they were about to attempt, the power they were about to unleash, was daunting. She had always believed in their cause, but now, faced with the truth of their undertaking, she found herself questioning whether they were truly prepared for the challenges that lay ahead. As they sat in the stillness, the peacefulness of the reef did little to calm the storm within them. It was as if the serenity around them only amplified the tension, making the urgency of their mission feel even more pronounced. They knew the stakes were high, that the success of the ritual was crucial not only for the reef's survival but for the restoration of balance to a world in desperate need of healing. But the fear of what might happen if they failed, the pressure of ensuring the Heartstone was used properly, weighed heavily on them both. And yet, as they glanced at each other, a shared understanding passed between them. No matter the fear or uncertainty, they had come this far, and they would continue. Together, they would face whatever came next. After their hard-fought battle with the Guardian and the successful acquisition of the Heartstone, Adrian and Serena had expected their path forward to become clearer. They had hoped that the artifact would provide the key to unlocking the next stage of their mission, and that the tension of their trials would give way to a renewed sense of unity. However, instead of bringing them closer together, the journey seemed to have deepened the rift between them. The weight of their mission, the responsibility of wielding such a powerful artifact, and the constant pressure of their looming ritual had started to erode the bond they once shared. Each new challenge seemed to create more distance, and what had once been a partnership built on trust and mutual understanding now felt fraught with unspoken tensions. Adrian could feel it most acutely, the subtle shift in their dynamic. Once, they had been able to rely on each other's strength and judgment without hesitation, but now doubt clouded their every decision. He had always been the more pragmatic of the two, but even his usual confidence had begun to falter under the weight of their mission. Serena, too, was struggling with her own inner turmoil. She had always been the heart of their alliance, the one who believed in their cause with unshakable resolve, but now she found herself questioning everything. Was she truly capable of seeing this mission through? Was she as committed as she once thought? These fears gnawed at her, and the isolation she felt, even in Adrian's presence, only deepened the growing divide. Their once seamless partnership, where they had relied on each other's strengths and balanced each other's weaknesses, now felt fragile. The weight of their fears, both personal and collective, had begun to create fissures that neither of them knew how to bridge. Though they both knew how vital their mission was, the strain on their relationship made everything more difficult. Words were left unsaid, glances filled with uncertainty replaced the knowing looks they once shared, and a quiet distance grew between them. In the midst of a quest that demanded their unity more than ever, they found themselves at odds, not just with the dangers ahead, but with the vulnerabilities they had yet to confront in each other. As they packed up their camp, the air between Adrian and Serena was thick with unspoken tension. Every movement felt deliberate, but devoid of the usual camaraderie they once shared. Adrian, usually the first to break the silence with a joke or a plan, was unusually quiet. His brow was furrowed in thought, and his normally upbeat demeanor had been replaced by a somber expression, one that seemed to weigh heavily on him. The quiet was palpable, the space between them stretching farther with each passing moment. His eyes occasionally flicked to Serena, but he quickly looked away, as though unsure of how to bridge the widening gap. Serena, too, found herself lost in her thoughts as they prepared to leave the campsite behind. The growing rift between them consumed her, like a storm cloud gathering on the horizon. She couldn't ignore the gnawing feeling in her chest, the creeping sense of doubt that had begun to overshadow her confidence in their shared mission. She had always been the one to keep their spirits high, to believe that together they could conquer any obstacle. But now, as she glanced at Adrian, the weight of their unspoken words seemed to hang between them like a barrier neither knew how to break. The distance between them felt like an insurmountable chasm, and she wasn't sure how to cross it. The task of packing up their camp felt like a finality, each item they stowed away in silence a reminder of the fractured state of their partnership. Every glance they exchanged seemed to carry the weight of things left unsaid, and neither knew how to mend the growing divide. As the last of the camp was packed and the fire extinguished, there was a finality to the moment. The peaceful surroundings, once a refuge, now seemed to amplify the quiet tension between them. Without a word, they both turned toward the path ahead, but the uneasy feeling lingered, like a shadow trailing them as they left behind the camp that had once been a symbol of their unity. "I think we should review the plan again," Adrian said abruptly, his voice cutting through the heavy silence like a blade. His words were a sudden shift in the air, and Serena's head snapped up, her thoughts interrupted. His eyes were focused on the path ahead, avoiding her gaze, but there was an edge to his voice that made her pause. It wasn't the suggestion itself that caught her attention, it was the way he spoke, as though he were trying to distract himself from something deeper, something unresolved between them. The tension in the air seemed to thicken, and Serena knew that the last few days had put a strain on their relationship, but she hadn't expected this. Serena took a slow breath, trying to gather her thoughts. She wasn't sure what exactly was happening between them, but she couldn't deny that something had shifted. The urgency in Adrian's request, though seemingly practical, felt like a way to avoid confronting the rift that had grown between them. She didn't want to ignore the tension either, but the mission, their purpose, remained at the forefront of her mind. She nodded, albeit reluctantly, and reached for the map, spreading it out between them. The quiet urgency in Adrian's posture made it clear that he wasn't just talking about their next step on the journey. There was something more he needed to address, though neither of them was quite ready to face it. As they both leaned over the map, their fingers brushed for a brief moment, but neither of them acknowledged it. The plan laid before them seemed as tangled as the emotions they weren't discussing, and Serena felt the weight of the unspoken words pressing in on her. Adrian's intent focus on the map was a shield, and she couldn't decide whether she was grateful for it or frustrated by it. The more they analyzed the route ahead, the more she realized that their success depended not just on the Heartstone or their skills, but on mending the fracture between them. And for the first time, Serena wasn't sure how to start. Serena looked up from the map, her eyes tired and frustrated, the weight of their mission bearing down on her more than ever. Her fingers hovered over the map, tracing the routes they had already discussed repeatedly, but it felt pointless now. The endless revisiting of their plan only seemed to highlight the underlying tension that had been growing between them. She could feel the frustration in Adrian's silence, the way he refused to meet her gaze, and it gnawed at her. She had hoped that after their victory with the Heartstone, their bond would be stronger, clearer, but instead, they seemed to be drifting further apart. "What's the real issue here?" Serena's words were sharper than she intended, but the strain of trying to push through this unspoken rift finally broke through her calm. She could feel her chest tightening as she spoke, the frustration bubbling to the surface. She wanted to move forward, to focus on their mission, but every step they took felt heavier with the distance between them. It wasn't just about the plan anymore. It was about their relationship, their trust, and the unsettling feeling that something vital had been left unsaid. Serena wasn't sure whether Adrian even knew how to confront what had shifted, but she couldn't ignore it any longer. Adrian looked at her then, his eyes weary and filled with uncertainty. He didn't say anything at first, and for a moment, Serena wondered if he was avoiding her question on purpose. But there was something else in his expression, something that mirrored the exhaustion in her own heart. Finally, he spoke, his voice low and hesitant. I don't know. It's like, the more we keep moving forward, the more it feels like we're losing something important. His words hung between them, and for the first time in days, they were both forced to acknowledge the gap that had quietly grown between them. It was no longer just the mission. It was them. Adrian's jaw tightened, and for a moment, he looked away, as if searching for the right words. The silence between them was heavy, and it felt as though every unsaid thought lingered in the air, just out of reach. He shifted uncomfortably, feeling the weight of Serena's gaze on him. The mission had been relentless, and each trial had only added to the pressure that seemed to be building between them. His frustration, mixed with concern, was evident in his stiff posture, as though he couldn't contain the thoughts that had been building in his mind. It's not just about the plan, he continued, his voice rough. I feel like there's something we're not addressing. We've been through so much, and it's starting to affect us. Serena stood still, processing his words. She had sensed the tension between them but had been too focused on the task at hand to confront it. Now, with Adrian's admission, the truth seemed inescapable. Their journey had changed them both in ways they hadn't fully acknowledged. The constant danger, the weight of their mission, the endless decisions, they had all taken a toll. Serena's heart tightened as she realized that she, too, had been burying the strain of their bond beneath the surface, unwilling to confront it until now. But as Adrian spoke, it became clear that they could no longer avoid what was slowly eating away at their connection. She exhaled slowly, her shoulders heavy with the realization that things were far more complicated than she had allowed herself to believe. I know, she murmured, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt it too. There was a vulnerability in her tone that she hadn't let show before, a crack in the armor she had built up to keep them moving forward. The fear of failure, the fear of losing everything they had worked for, had been consuming her. But now she saw that the strain between them was just as threatening. Serena's hands trembled slightly as she folded the map, the weight of the unspoken words between them making it harder to breathe. They couldn't move forward without addressing what was happening between them. Not anymore. Serena's frustration boiled over, and she could feel the heat rise in her chest, the words spilling out before she could stop them. Of course it's affecting us, she snapped, her voice sharp. We're facing impossible odds, and it's taking a toll on both of us. Her gaze hardened, focusing on Adrian as if she could pierce through him with her words. The weight of their mission had become a constant burden, one that seemed to grow heavier with each passing day. They had been through so much, and yet instead of acknowledging how it was changing them, they'd been pretending like everything was fine. Her fingers clenched into fists, frustration bubbling up from deep within. But instead of talking about it, we're just avoiding the real issues. She paced in a small circle, her movements tense, every step a reflection of the inner turmoil she had kept bottled up for so long. Serena had always been one to push through adversity, to focus on the goal and keep moving forward, no matter what. But now, with the pressure of the journey weighing on her, she could no longer pretend that their unspoken tension didn't exist. It's like we're walking on a knife's edge, she continued, her words quieter now but no less forceful. I can feel it every time we disagree or avoid confronting what's happening between us. The cracks are starting to show, Adrian. Her heart pounded in her chest, a mixture of anger, fear, and helplessness. Serena stopped pacing and looked directly at him, her eyes searching for a response. I know we have a mission, but we also have to deal with this, she said, her voice softer now, vulnerable in a way it hadn't been before. We can't keep pretending that everything's fine while we're falling apart on the inside. The air between them was thick with the weight of her words, and Serena felt exposed, her walls crumbling as she finally admitted the truth to herself, and to him. Adrian's eyes flashed with hurt as Serena's words hit him harder than he expected. He had always believed that his focus on the mission was what would keep them moving forward, that the goal was what mattered most. But hearing Serena's accusation made him question everything. His chest tightened, and he instinctively stepped back, trying to distance himself from the rising emotions. Avoiding? He repeated, his voice tight with frustration. I'm trying to keep us focused. We can't afford to let personal issues get in the way of our mission." The sharpness in his tone betrayed the hurt that lingered beneath the surface, the struggle to balance their growing tension with the urgency of their task. He crossed his arms, trying to steady his breathing, but his mind raced with all the doubts he hadn't voiced. He had been pushing his own concerns aside, burying his own feelings about their strained relationship for the sake of progress. Every time they stopped to talk about what was really happening between them, it felt like they lost valuable time they couldn't afford to waste. Adrian had thought that if they just kept moving, kept fighting, they could deal with everything else later. But now, the weight of their silence pressed on him, and he realized how much he had been avoiding as well. Adrian took a deep breath, forcing his gaze to meet hers, though it was a challenge to hide the vulnerability in his eyes. "I'm not saying we can't talk about it," he continued, his voice quieter now, but still laced with frustration. "But we don't have the luxury to unravel everything right now. The stakes are too high. We've come too far, and I'm not going to let anything jeopardize that." He paused, his gaze lingering on Serena, searching for some understanding in her eyes, as though hoping she could see the conflict that raged inside him. The mission had always come first, but the tension between them was becoming harder to ignore. Serena's voice rose in exasperation, the weight of her emotions finally breaking through the dam she had carefully built. The words came out in a rush, sharp and filled with a mix of frustration and fear. "And what about our feelings?" she demanded, her eyes locking onto his with an intensity that mirrored the turmoil inside her. "We've been pushing them aside, pretending like everything's fine. But it's not, Adrian. I'm scared." Her hands trembled slightly at her sides, and she could feel the pressure building in her chest, the fear that had been gnawing at her for days now spilling out. "This whole quest, the curse, it's all too much. It's like we're fighting an enemy we can't even see, and we're supposed to do it alone." Her breath hitched as the vulnerability she had been avoiding surfaced. Every step they took on this mission had led them deeper into danger, both from external forces and the growing rift between them. The weight of their mission had only compounded her own insecurities. Serena hadn't admitted it to anyone, not even to herself, but the idea of losing Adrian, of losing what little connection they had left, terrified her more than the looming curse ever could. The stakes had always felt personal, but now, with each passing day, it was becoming harder to ignore how much the pressure of the quest was suffocating them. Serena took a shaky breath, her gaze softening, though her words remained heavy. "I'm not saying we should ignore the mission. I know it's important. But we can't pretend like this," she said, motioning between them. "Isn't affecting us. I don't want to lose you to this curse, Adrian. I don't want us to be so focused on what comes next that we forget about the here and now, about what we're fighting for." Her voice was quieter now, a plea wrapped in the raw honesty of her fears. She wasn't asking for answers, but for a moment of understanding, something she felt they had been lacking for far too long. Adrian's face softened, his features tightening with a mixture of sympathy and frustration as he processed her words. He had never intended for Serena to carry the weight of their mission alone, yet that was exactly what had happened. His shoulders sagged slightly, the invisible burden of their shared journey pressing down on him. "I'm scared too," he admitted, his voice low and heavy with the truth he had been too afraid to speak. "But I thought if we just kept moving forward, if we focused on the task at hand, maybe we could handle it." His hands clenched, fingers brushing over the edges of his gear, as if the act of touching something tangible could steady him. "I didn't want to burden you with my own fears." He paused, the words feeling harder to say than he'd anticipated, as though voicing his vulnerability might make it too real. Adrian had always prided himself on being the steady one, the one who could keep moving even when the world around them seemed to fall apart. But the weight of their mission, the stakes of what they were facing, had slowly chipped away at that facade. He hadn't wanted Serena to see his cracks, to see the way the pressure was warping him, but now he realized how much that silence had cost them both. "I thought if I kept it together, we'd have a better chance of succeeding. But I see now that pushing everything down isn't the answer." His gaze softened as he met her eyes, the rawness of the moment breaking through the walls he had built. I'm sorry, he murmured, his voice full of regret. I should have told you sooner. We're in this together, Serena. I shouldn't have kept you at arm's length. The vulnerability in his voice was something he rarely showed, a quiet admission that, despite his determination, he, too, was struggling. He stepped closer, his hand reaching out slightly, as if to offer her something more than words, a silent promise that they would face the challenges ahead as partners, not just co-conspirators in a dangerous mission. Serena shook her head, the weight of everything they hadn't said settling heavily between them. Her eyes shimmered with unshed tears, the pressure of their journey and the unspoken tensions finally breaking through. We can't keep doing this, she said softly, her voice trembling. We need to face our fears and talk about what's really going on between us. Each word felt like a raw release, something she had been holding on to for far too long. The cracks in their relationship had become impossible to ignore, and as much as she wanted to focus solely on the mission, she realized that their partnership was slipping through their fingers. Her chest tightened as she continued, the emotions she had bottled up threatening to overwhelm her. We're supposed to be partners, she said, her voice gaining strength, though it still carried the weight of frustration and hurt. But it feels like we're drifting apart. The words felt like an accusation, but in truth, they were more of a confession, an admission of the distance she had been sensing between them for far too long. Despite all they had been through, despite the shared purpose they had once had, she now felt as though their connection was fraying, each moment of silence and avoidance pulling them further away from each other. Serena took a shaky breath, her fingers curling around the edge of her pack as she fought to regain control of her emotions. She had always prided herself on being strong, capable, but right now, she felt fragile, exposed. We can't keep pretending everything is fine, she said, her voice more composed now, though still laced with the vulnerability she couldn't shake. If we're going to make it through this, we need to be honest with each other, not just about the mission, but about what we're feeling. She looked up at Adrian, her gaze steady but filled with longing for understanding. I don't want to lose what we have, but if we keep ignoring the truth, we might never find our way back. The silence that stretched between them was thick and suffocating, filled with the weight of everything they hadn't said. Neither of them moved, the air heavy with unspoken words and raw emotions. Adrian's jaw clenched, his mind racing through everything that had led them to this point, the shared battles, the victories, and the growing sense of disconnection that had crept into their relationship. It felt as though the distance between them had become a physical thing, an invisible wall that neither of them knew how to break down. His eyes remained fixed on the ground, avoiding Serena's gaze, not because he didn't want to face her, but because he feared what he might see in her eyes. Serena, too, was lost in her own thoughts, her emotions swirling in a chaotic storm. She had always prided herself on her ability to keep her composure, but the constant strain of the quest, the burden of their shared mission, and the ever-present fear of failure had begun to take its toll. What had once been a partnership based on mutual respect and trust now felt strained, fragile, as if it could shatter with the wrong word or gesture. She couldn't ignore the ache in her chest, the ache that came from feeling both deeply connected to Adrian and yet so far apart. The thoughts she had been suppressing for so long now clawed at her, demanding to be addressed. Both of them stood apart, their bodies facing opposite directions, yet their minds were caught in a similar battle. Adrian's insecurities gnawed at him, making him doubt his ability to protect Serena or to make the right decisions moving forward. Serena, meanwhile, struggled with the fear that the cracks in their relationship might be too deep to repair. Neither of them had the answers, and the uncertainty that hung in the air made it impossible to ignore the emotional rift that had begun to form between them. What had once been an unshakable partnership was now a fragile alliance, and the tension between them was a constant reminder of the delicate balance they were trying to maintain. After what felt like an eternity, Adrian's voice broke the silence, soft and full of sincerity. I never meant to distance myself from you, he said, his words heavy with emotion. He turned to face her, his eyes searching for understanding, though he wasn't sure he could find it. His usual confidence had given way to vulnerability, and it felt strange, unfamiliar. I just didn't know how to deal with everything that's happening, his words more rushed now, as if he were trying to explain something that had been buried too long. "I thought if I stayed focused on the mission, it would help us both." He ran a hand through his hair in frustration, the weight of his confession hanging in the air. Serena stood motionless, her heart aching at the honesty in his voice. She could see the struggle in his expression, the internal conflict that had been eating away at him. It was clear that Adrian had been trying to carry the burden of their mission alone, convinced that if he kept his emotions in check, everything would fall into place. She felt a pang of guilt, knowing she had been just as guilty of avoiding the hard conversations. But hearing him admit it aloud, the pain and fear that had been driving him made the truth even harder to ignore. She had always known Adrian was strong, but now, she could see how much the weight of their quest had worn him down. The silence between them stretched again, but this time it was different. It was not a wall, but a space where understanding began to grow. Serena's eyes softened as she processed his words, her heart filling with a mixture of empathy and longing. She wanted to tell him that it was okay, that they could face it together, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she nodded slowly, acknowledging the vulnerability that had surfaced between them. "I understand," she said quietly, her voice gentle but firm. The distance between them hadn't disappeared, but in this moment, it felt a little smaller, less insurmountable. And for the first time in a long while, she felt the stirrings of hope that they could find their way back to each other. Serena's expression softened, but the pain still lingered in her eyes. She took a step closer, her gaze meeting his with a mix of tenderness and resolve. "I understand that you were trying to protect me," she said, her voice quieter now, filled with the weight of the unspoken truth. The depth of his effort to shield her from his fears didn't escape her, but the realization only made her heart ache more. She had felt his distance, the walls he built around himself, and she had carried the burden of that unacknowledged pain, even as she fought to protect him in return. The tension between them had grown too thick, and she knew that this unspoken strain was becoming just as dangerous as any external threat they faced. "But we need to be honest with each other," she continued, her words firm but compassionate. She took another slow step forward, her hands unconsciously tightening around the edges of her cloak. It was clear now that honesty was the bridge they needed to cross if they were to remain partners, not just in their quest, but in the rawness of their shared experience. "We need to confront our fears together, not hide from them," Serena added, her voice gaining strength with each word. The realization had settled deep within her. They couldn't move forward in silence, with so many things left unsaid. They needed to face the reality of their situation, the personal fears and vulnerabilities that they had kept hidden, in order to build the trust that had once been the foundation of their bond. Adrian stood motionless, his breath catching slightly as he absorbed her words. The vulnerability in her voice cracked through the barrier he had erected around himself, and he couldn't help but feel a pang of guilt. He had never intended to shut her out, but in his attempt to protect her, he had inadvertently done the opposite. The weight of her plea settled over him, and he realized she was right. They couldn't keep carrying their fears alone. They had to face them together, as they had done with every other challenge that had come their way. Slowly, Adrian took a step forward, meeting her halfway, his eyes soft with remorse and understanding. For the first time in a long while, he felt the walls between them begin to crumble, replaced by the fragile but powerful connection of shared vulnerability. Adrian nodded slowly, his shoulders slumping as the weight of her words sank in. It was as if a heavy burden had been lifted, replaced by a quiet sense of relief that he could finally admit the truth to her. The regret in his expression was unmistakable, the sharp realization that in his attempt to protect her, he had inadvertently created distance between them. The mission had consumed him, driven him to a point where he had forgotten what they were truly fighting for, not just the success of their quest, but the strength of the bond they shared. The realization stung, but it was also a necessary step forward. "I've been so focused on the mission," Adrian continued, his voice low, filled with self-awareness. The words tumbled out as if the confession had been waiting at the edge of his mind, longing to be spoken. His gaze dropped for a moment, regret flickering in his eyes. He had let the task at hand overshadow the very thing that had made them partners in the first place: the trust and connection they had built over time. All his efforts, all his planning, had been aimed at achieving the goal, but somewhere along the way, he had forgotten that their strength was in their unity, in how they faced the challenges together, side by side. Looking up, he met her eyes with sincerity. "I've neglected the most important part, us." The simple statement carried with it the weight of his actions, but also a deep resolve to make it right. Adrian took a small step toward her, his voice steady now, filled with an earnest determination to restore what had been lost. "We can't do this alone, not like this. I've been fooling myself, thinking that I could carry everything on my own. But I need you, Serena. We need to be in this together, fully." His words were an apology, a promise, and a commitment all wrapped into one, as he stood before her, ready to rebuild the foundation that had cracked under the pressure of their mission. They sat down on a nearby rock, the weight of their conversation lingering between them like an unspoken understanding. The quiet around them felt heavier now, as if the world was holding its breath, allowing them a moment of peace to process everything they had just shared. The morning light filtered through the trees, casting soft shadows on their faces, but it did little to ease the tension that had settled in their hearts. Both of them were exhausted, not just from their journey, but from the emotional toll of the last few days. They had fought side by side against dangers both external and internal, but this was a different battle, one that required vulnerability, honesty, and trust. The silence between them was no longer strained, but laden with the recognition of the road they needed to travel together, not just physically, but emotionally. Adrian's hand reached out slowly, almost hesitantly at first, but then with a quiet resolve. He gently took Serena's hand in his grip firm yet tender, as though grounding them both in that single, simple connection. His thumb traced small circles over her knuckles, the act soothing them both in its simplicity. His touch conveyed more than words could express, a silent promise to stand by her, to face whatever came next not as individuals, but as partners. It was an unspoken acknowledgement that the path forward wouldn't be easy, but as long as they held on to each other, they could navigate it together. Serena looked at their joined hands, feeling a sense of warmth and reassurance flood through her. The world around them had not changed, but something between them had. The distance that had grown between them seemed to shrink with every heartbeat, and for the first time in a while, she felt a glimmer of hope. She squeezed his hand in return, a simple gesture but one that carried the weight of her own promises to him. "We're in this together," she murmured, her voice steady, yet tinged with the vulnerability she had allowed herself to show. The words felt like a vow, a renewal of their bond. And in that moment, with the heartstone resting beside them and the weight of their mission still looming, they knew that their journey was far from over, but they would face it united, stronger for the understanding they had forged. Adrian's voice was soft, but there was a depth of sincerity in his words that made them impossible to ignore. He shifted slightly, turning toward Serena with an earnest gaze, his eyes filled with both regret and determination. "I'm sorry for not being more open," he said, the words heavy with the weight of all the things left unsaid between them. He had kept so much buried inside, thinking it was the only way to protect her. But now he saw how that silence had created a rift between them, leaving them vulnerable in ways that had nothing to do with their mission. "Let's promise to be honest with each other from now on," he added, his voice firm but gentle, as though he was pledging something sacred. "We can't let our personal struggles drive us apart." His hand tightened around hers, as if to seal the promise, the simple act of touching her grounding him in the resolve to change. Serena felt a tightness in her chest, but it was different now, a softening, a release of the tension she hadn't even realized she'd been holding. The sincerity in Adrian's apology struck her deeply, and she could feel the weight of his words resonating in her own heart. She had been so caught up in her own fears and frustrations, but hearing him speak from a place of vulnerability, acknowledging their shared struggles, gave her the space to breathe. She hadn't wanted to face their issues either, but hearing him admit the same made it easier to step forward. "I've been scared too," she confessed quietly, her voice barely above a whisper as she met his gaze. "I was afraid that if we kept pushing forward like this, We'd lose everything, even each other. They sat in silence for a moment, the world around them fading into the background as they simply allowed the weight of their emotions to settle between them. Adrian's apology, and the promise they were making to each other seemed to fill the air with a quiet sense of understanding, as though a fog had lifted and the path forward was no longer clouded with unspoken doubts. Serena's heart swelled with a sense of relief, knowing that they had both acknowledged the truth of their situation. They were no longer just two people on a quest. They were partners, and together, they would face whatever came next with the honesty and strength they had found in this moment. Serena took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment settle within her. She squeezed Adrian's hand, her fingers tightening around his as if grounding herself in the simple, steady reassurance of his presence. Her eyes met his, and for the first time in what felt like ages, she saw not just the man she had been fighting alongside, but the person she was fighting for. "I'm sorry too," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling within her. Her heart ached with the realization of how much they had both been carrying alone, and she felt the sting of regret for not opening up sooner. "I've been overwhelmed and scared," she confessed, her gaze softening as the vulnerability in her words became clear. She had been so caught up in her own fears, trying to keep them buried, but now she understood the importance of letting those fears be seen. "But I should have communicated that better." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with their shared understanding. Serena's chest felt tight, but in the best possible way, as though shedding the weight of her silence was finally allowing her to breathe more fully. She had let the pressure of their quest, and her own anxieties, distance her from Adrian, but now she realized that shutting him out had only made things worse. She had built walls where there should have been openness, and she regretted that. But in the face of their struggle, and with the Heartstone now in their possession, she knew that they couldn't afford to continue down this path of isolation. "We need to face this together," she added softly, her voice strong with the weight of her commitment. The words weren't just a promise to Adrian, they were a pledge to herself, to the journey ahead, and to the strength they had found in each other's honesty. Serena's eyes stayed locked with Adrian's, and in that shared look, there was no longer a sense of distance between them. The tension, the unspoken fears, all of it had been laid bare, and in its place was a quiet resolve. They had both acknowledged their faults, their fears, and now they could move forward, not as individuals struggling alone, but as partners, united in their purpose. Serena felt a renewed sense of trust in Adrian, and a growing certainty that, together, they could overcome the impossible. The Heartstone was only the beginning of their journey, but with this newfound understanding between them, they were ready to face whatever came next. With their promises made, Adrian and Serena spent the remainder of the day talking, really talking, in a way they hadn't allowed themselves to before. The air around them seemed to hum with a quiet intensity, as they slowly began to unravel the fears and anxieties that had been building up inside them for so long. Serena spoke first, her voice tentative but resolute as she described the weight of the journey on her shoulders. She admitted how the constant danger, the pressure of their mission, and the unknowns ahead had made her feel increasingly isolated. Every decision felt critical, and yet she often felt as if she were carrying the burden alone. Her vulnerability was raw, and for the first time in a long while, it felt like a relief to share it. Adrian listened intently, his eyes never leaving her face as she spoke. When it was his turn, he opened up about his own fears. He confessed how he had tried to shield both of them from the emotional toll of their quest by focusing solely on the mission. But in doing so, he had unknowingly built a wall between them, thinking it was easier to deal with their struggles in silence. He explained how the idea of failure, of not being enough to protect Serena or break the curse, weighed heavily on him. The emotional distance that had formed between them was a result of his own internalized fears, and he finally understood how his silence had only made things worse. His words were heavy with regret, but as he spoke, there was a sense of catharsis in them, as if the act of sharing his burdens with her lifted a small part of that weight. The conversation was difficult. Every word seemed to peel away layers of pent-up emotion and unspoken hurt, but it was exactly what they needed. As the sun began to set, casting the world in a soft, golden hue, They both felt the strain of their strained trust slowly begin to heal. They had admitted their flaws, faced their fears together, and recognized the importance of leaning on each other. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, there was a sense of clarity between them. The emotional toll of the quest had not vanished, but now they had a better understanding of each other's struggles and a stronger bond of mutual support. What had once felt like an insurmountable divide now seemed like something they could bridge together. As evening descended, painting the sky with hues of amber and purple, a sense of renewed connection settled between Adrian and Serena. The weight of their earlier conversation hung in the air, but it no longer felt like an insurmountable burden. Instead, it was a bridge, linking them in a way that hadn't been possible before. They were more aware of each other's vulnerabilities, their fears no longer hidden but acknowledged. There was a quiet strength in the way they stood together, side by side, ready to face whatever awaited them on their journey. The intimacy of their shared understanding created a new foundation for their bond, one that felt more resilient than it had in days past. The road ahead was still uncertain, fraught with dangers and unknown trials. They both knew that the curse wasn't going to break itself, and the stakes of their mission hadn't changed. But the difference now was that they were no longer shouldering the weight of their fears alone. Their partnership had been tested, but in that test, it had grown stronger. The personal demons that had threatened to tear them apart had instead forged a deeper connection, one built on honesty and a renewed sense of trust. They were no longer just two individuals on a mission. They were a united front, capable of facing whatever came their way. The trust between them was fragile, as trust often is after it has been shaken. But as they moved forward, both Adrian and Serena understood that it could be repaired, piece by piece. They had made the first step toward rebuilding it with their open dialogue, and they were determined to nurture it as they continued their journey. They had learned that no challenge was too great if they faced it together, and that the foundation of any successful mission was the strength of the bonds between those who undertook it. Whatever lay ahead, they knew they were no longer alone in it. With their renewed commitment to each other, Adrian and Serena began to gather their belongings, preparing to face the next stage of their quest. The weight of their previous struggles still lingered, but there was a sense of clarity now that had eluded them before. They no longer had to shoulder the burden of their fears in isolation. As they packed their gear, their movements were purposeful, each action a testament to their shared resolve. They were no longer just allies driven by necessity, but partners who had seen the depths of each other's vulnerabilities and come through it stronger for it. The challenges ahead would undoubtedly test their strength, both physically and emotionally. The path they walked was fraught with danger, and the stakes of their mission had only grown higher with each step. Yet, as they set their sights on the horizon, there was a quiet confidence in the way they worked together. They had learned that their bond was an asset that would carry them through the trials to come. Their communication, once strained, was now more open, their trust more solid. They were no longer just two people battling the external forces of their quest. They were a team, united in purpose and understanding. The trials they would face in the coming days might be even more daunting than those that had come before, but they knew they were ready to confront them with a deeper understanding and trust in one another. The emotional barriers that had once divided them had been torn down, and in their place stood an unspoken promise. They would face the future together, no matter what it held. The road would be long and fraught with uncertainty, but Adrian and Serena now knew that, with each other's support, there was no challenge they couldn't overcome. They were no longer just surviving, they were ready to thrive as partners in their shared journey. Chapter 28: A Heartfelt Confession. The sun dipped low in the sky, casting a warm golden glow over the reef as Adrian and Serena made their way back to their camp. The soft hum of the waves against the shore filled the silence between them, and the fading light reflected off the water, creating a shimmering path beneath their feet. The world around them seemed to slow, as if mirroring the shift in their relationship. Despite the peace of the evening, the weight of the past few days still lingered, pressing against their hearts. There had been progress, certainly, but there was still an unspoken need for more, a deeper understanding of each other that neither had fully voiced. The conversation they had shared earlier had lightened the air between them, but it wasn't enough to erase all the unease. As they walked side by side, The space between them was filled with a quiet tension, not the sharp kind that had been there before, but a subtle, almost imperceptible pull. It was the kind of tension that only time and honesty could resolve, and they both knew that. There was a sense of anticipation, like the calm before a storm, as if they were both waiting for the next step, the next piece of the puzzle that would help them heal the distance that had grown between them. Serena glanced at Adrian, her thoughts swirling as she studied his profile in the dimming light. She saw the fatigue in his eyes, the same weariness that mirrored her own. Their journey had taken its toll, not just physically but emotionally. It was easy to get lost in the rush of the quest, in the urgency of their mission, but moments like these reminded her that they were more than just partners in a race against time. They were people with hearts that had been battered by fear, uncertainty, and unspoken doubts. It was only by facing those feelings head-on that they could move forward, not just in their quest, but in their relationship as well. As they neared the camp, the sound of crackling firewood greeted them, a familiar comfort amidst the uncertainty. The air felt cooler now, and the first stars were beginning to twinkle in the sky. Despite the unresolved tension, there was a quiet reassurance between them. They had come this far, and though the road ahead was still unclear, they had the foundation of trust to carry them through. There was more to be done, both in their quest and in their relationship, but for the first time in a while, they felt ready to face whatever came next, together. They had decided to take a break from their relentless quest, choosing instead to spend the evening by the shore. The decision had come after days of tension and uncertainty, a quiet acknowledgement that they needed to reconnect with each other and the world around them. The sun was setting behind them, casting a golden hue over the horizon as they found a quiet spot on the beach. The rhythmic sound of the waves lapping against the shore filled the air, their steady ebb and flow creating a calming backdrop to the moment. It was a rare opportunity for peace amidst the chaos of their journey. As they set up a small fire, the crackling of the wood added a comforting warmth to the cool evening air. The firelight danced across their faces, casting flickering shadows on the sand. Serena busied herself arranging the firewood, her movements slow and deliberate, as if she were savoring the simplicity of the task. Adrian, on the other hand, sat down on a nearby rock, his gaze lingering on the horizon. The exhaustion from their journey had settled deep within him, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to relax, focusing only on the present moment instead of the looming challenges ahead. Once the fire was crackling steadily, they both settled onto the soft sand, the warmth of the fire contrasting with the cool breeze that swept in from the ocean. The vastness of the sky stretched out before them, the first stars beginning to appear as the twilight deepened. It was a peaceful scene, one that allowed them to forget, if only for a few hours, the weight of their mission and the struggles that had threatened to tear them apart. The sounds of the waves and the crackling fire were the only distractions, giving them space to breathe, reflect, and be present with one another. For a moment, they simply sat in silence, side by side, as the world around them seemed to slow down. It wasn't a silence of discomfort but one of quiet understanding. Their earlier confrontation still lingered in the back of their minds, but here, by the shore, it felt distant and manageable. The fire cast a soft glow on their faces, and the quiet of the night wrapped around them like a blanket. They had faced battles before, but this moment of peace, was something they both needed. It wasn't a resolution to their problems, but it was a step in the right direction, a brief pause to gather themselves for what lay ahead. As they sat together, the fire crackling between them, Serena's gaze was fixed on the horizon, her thoughts far away. The last light of day stretched across the sky in brilliant hues of pink and orange, the colors slowly fading into dusk. The vibrant spectacle above seemed to mirror the tumultuous emotions churning inside her, feelings of doubt, fear, and the weight of responsibility. Each shifting shade in the sky seemed to echo the uncertainty she felt about the future, and yet, there was something oddly calming in the way the day surrendered to night. It reminded her that some things, no matter how chaotic, eventually gave way to rest. She didn't speak at first, lost in the beauty of the scene and the quiet within. Her fingers absently traced patterns in the sand, her mind wandering through the many layers of their journey. The path they had walked so far had been riddled with challenges, and each step seemed to carry more weight than the last. But beyond the mission, beyond the external struggles, there was a deeper, more personal battle raging within her, one that had to do with her own fears, her own uncertainties about whether she was truly capable of carrying the burden of this quest. Adrian sat beside her, his presence a steady comfort, though she knew that the quiet between them was still fragile. He had tried to be there for her, to support her, but she couldn't help feeling like she was pushing him away. How could she let him in when she didn't fully understand her own emotions? It was a battle between wanting to be close to him, to share everything with him, and the instinct to protect him from the storm inside her. She was aware that her silence could be as much a wall as it was a retreat, but for now, the words to explain herself seemed just out of reach. The fire between them crackled louder for a moment, the sound breaking through the silence, and Serena let out a slow breath. It wasn't just the mission or the artifact weighing on her mind, it was the connection she felt with Adrian. The trust they had built together had been tested in ways neither of them had anticipated, but the strength of their bond still pulsed beneath the surface. The question that lingered in her mind was whether they could continue forward, not just as companions in this quest, but as partners in something deeper. She wasn't sure yet, but in that moment, with the fire flickering and the night drawing near, it seemed like the first step toward finding that answer had been taken. Adrian's gaze lingered on Serena, his brow furrowed with quiet concern as he watched the distant look in her eyes. The soft glow of the fire danced across her face, casting fleeting shadows that seemed to deepen her pensive expression. He could sense the weight in the air, the way she was withdrawn, even though they had spent so many hours together, facing danger, surviving, and fighting side by side. But tonight she was distant, her mind seemingly adrift in some far-off place. The gentle crackle of the flames was the only sound between them, amplifying the silence that hung heavy with unspoken words. He hesitated before speaking, choosing his words carefully. "You seem far away tonight," he said softly, his voice just above a whisper, as though afraid of disturbing the fragile peace they had shared. He knew something was troubling her, but he didn't want to pry. They had both carried their burdens for so long in solitude, but the moments of shared vulnerability had become few and far between. "Is there something on your mind?" he asked, his question sincere, his concern genuine. It was as much an invitation as it was a plea for connection, hoping she would open up, let him in, even if just a little. Serena felt the pull of his gaze, the warmth of his words reaching her through the fog of her thoughts. She knew he could sense the distance she had tried to keep between them. His question stirred something deep inside her, an ache she had been trying to ignore for days. She was tired, not just physically but emotionally, and the weight of their mission was beginning to feel like too much to carry alone. Yet she hesitated. She wasn't sure how to put her feelings into words, how to explain the torrent of emotions that had been building inside her. She wanted to share, to confide in him, but vulnerability felt like a fragile thing, something she wasn't sure she could afford in the face of their larger purpose. Taking a deep breath, Serena finally met his eyes, her gaze steady but uncertain. The openness in his expression, the patience that radiated from him, made her heart ache with a mixture of gratitude and guilt. She had never wanted to shut him out, but the pressure of the journey had worn her thin, and the fear of burdening him with her own fears had held her back. But in that moment, she realized that the walls she had built between them were only making the distance greater. "I'm just trying to keep everything together," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "And it feels like the weight of everything is becoming too much to bear. I don't know if I'm strong enough to carry it all." The admission hung in the air, raw and vulnerable, and she couldn't help but feel exposed. Serena's fingers tightened around the edge of the blanket she was sitting on, the cool fabric grounding her as she tried to steady her racing thoughts. The words felt heavy on her tongue, as though they had been building for so long that the mere act of speaking them felt almost impossible. She had always been someone who carried her burdens alone, but the silence between them had grown unbearable. She could feel Adrian's steady gaze on her, his unspoken concern pressing against her like a weight. The rhythmic crash of the waves against the shore seemed to mirror the turmoil she had been battling inside. Her chest rose and fell with a deep breath, and for the first time in days, she allowed herself to truly process what she had been holding back. "Yes, there is," she said quietly, her voice barely rising above the sound of the wind. She turned her gaze back to the horizon, not because she didn't want to meet his eyes, but because it was easier to speak when the distance between them felt less intense. The sky had softened into shades of purple and dark blue, and the fading light seemed to wrap around her like a veil, giving her the courage she needed. "I've been carrying a lot inside me," she continued, the words flowing with a mixture of relief and hesitation. "And I think it's time I shared it with you." Adrian's presence beside her felt like a steady anchor in the chaos of her thoughts. He didn't rush her, his silence a quiet invitation for her to continue at her own pace. Serena could feel his attention on her, his understanding in the way he simply waited, allowing her the space to find the words she needed. She knew he wanted to help, wanted to share the weight of the journey, but it was hard for her to let go of the need to keep things together, to maintain the facade of strength she had built around herself. Yet, as the quiet stretched on, she realized that the strength she had relied on for so long was no longer enough. Her voice wavered as she finally spoke the truth she had been burying. "I'm scared," she admitted, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "I'm scared of what this journey is doing to us, to me. And I'm scared that we're losing sight of each other in all of this. I don't want to be the one who drags us down, but I can't keep pretending everything's okay." The vulnerability in her words hung in the air like a fragile thing, but as she spoke them, something inside her seemed to ease. The weight she had been carrying began to lift, even just a little, and she realized that sharing her fears was the first step toward healing the rift that had grown between them. Adrian's words were gentle but firm, a soft assurance that wrapped around Serena like a comforting embrace. His gaze never wavered from her face as he turned to face her fully, his posture open and inviting. The flickering firelight danced across his features, casting shadows that seemed to emphasize the sincerity in his eyes. He had always been the one to keep them moving forward, to stay focused on the mission, but in this moment, he was offering her something different, his presence, his undivided attention. The weight of their shared journey had settled between them, but this moment felt like an opportunity to lay those burdens down, even if just for a while. Serena looked at him, her chest tightening as she searched his eyes for any sign of judgment or frustration. Instead, she found only understanding, an unspoken promise that whatever she said, he would be there to face it with her. She had always feared that opening up would push him away, that her weaknesses would be too much for him to bear. But now, as she took in the calm certainty in Adrian's expression, she realized that her fears had been misplaced. He wasn't looking for perfection, he was simply looking to be there for her in whatever form that might take. "I know things have been tense," Adrian continued, his voice steady, "and I'm not going to pretend I haven't noticed the distance between us. But I'm here now. I want to listen to everything you need to say." He reached out slowly, as if to offer a quiet invitation, and placed his hand near hers on the blanket. The gesture was simple but meaningful, an anchor in the midst of the storm of emotions that had surrounded them for so long. His touch was warm, grounding, reminding Serena that, despite all the uncertainty that lay ahead, they were still in this together. Serena's breath hitched as she looked down at their hands, the proximity of his touch offering a rare comfort. She had spent so much time pushing her fears and frustrations deep inside, but in the face of Adrian's unwavering support, the dam she had built around her emotions began to crack. She had feared vulnerability for so long, but Adrian's openness invited her to let go. With a shaky breath, she spoke again, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've been so afraid of what this journey is doing to us. To me. But you're right, we can't keep ignoring it. I need to share this with you. I need to trust that we can face it together." Serena's hand shook ever so slightly as she reached for the small locket that rested against her chest. The gold was worn, the chain thin but sturdy, and the locket itself had seen years of handling, its surface smoothed by time. She took a deep breath before gently prying it open, revealing a faded photograph tucked inside. The image, yellowed with age, showed a young girl with bright eyes and a mischievous smile, standing beside a woman whose warm, loving gaze was directed toward her. The woman's features were soft yet strong, the kind of expression that Serena had come to associate with safety and warmth. It was her mother, standing proudly beside her, as though nothing could break the bond between them. Serena's fingers traced the edges of the photograph, her mind drifting back to the days when the world seemed simpler, when the love she shared with her mother had been the one constant in her life. The pain of losing that connection still lingered within her, a sharp ache that she had buried deep beneath her focus on the mission. But now, as she looked at the photograph, the weight of her loss seemed heavier than ever. The journey they had undertaken, the curse they sought to break, the battles they had fought, had all been driven by the need to restore balance. But a part of Serena had never stopped mourning the absence of the person she had once relied on for guidance. Her voice was soft, barely rising above the crackling of the fire between them. "This is my mother," she said, her words almost lost in the evening breeze. She died when I was young. I was just a girl, barely old enough to understand. But her loss, it's something that stayed with me all these years. I've always felt like part of me is missing, like there's a piece of my past that I can't quite reach, no matter how hard I try. Serena paused, her throat tight as the weight of her confession settled around her. She hadn't intended to share this with Adrian tonight, but the openness between them now felt like a natural path toward healing. Adrian remained silent, his eyes fixed on the locket in Serena's hand, understanding the significance of the gesture. He could see how deeply the loss had shaped her, how much it still hurt her. He had always known that there was more beneath the surface of Serena's determination, but hearing it from her, seeing the vulnerability in her eyes, shifted something in him. He had his own fears and insecurities, but in this moment, he wanted nothing more than to offer the comfort and understanding she needed. Without a word, he gently placed a hand on hers, his touch a silent promise to stand by her, no matter the weight of the past or the uncertainty of the future. Serena's fingers lingered on the locket, her gaze never wavering from the photograph of her mother. The gentle glow of the fire flickered in her eyes, casting shadows that seemed to echo the heaviness of her words. "This is my mother," she began, her voice steady but laced with emotion. "She was a powerful mermaid, a guardian of the reef before me, a protector of its magic and all the creatures who depended on it." Her lips trembled slightly as she spoke, but she pressed on, the memories of her mother filling her heart. She was fierce in a way that only someone who loved something so deeply could be, but she also had a kindness about her, a tenderness that made her the heart of everything she did. She was the one who taught me how to harness the magic of the reef, how to protect it, how to be strong in the face of any danger. Serena paused, her eyes moving from the locket to the distant horizon, where the waves crashed with a rhythmic power. "But she was also bound by the same curse that has trapped me," she continued, her voice quieter now, as though the words themselves carried the weight of years of grief. "The same curse that hangs over this entire place, the one that forces guardians like us to carry the responsibility of protecting the reef for eternity." She swallowed hard, trying to keep the tremor in her voice at bay. "I never understood it completely back then. I was too young to see the full scope of what she had sacrificed. But I know now that her life, her freedom, was stolen from her, just like it's been stolen from me." The fire crackled in the silence that followed, its warmth doing little to ease the chill that had settled in Serena's chest. The pain of remembering her mother, of recounting the loss, seemed to deepen with every word. When she died, it wasn't just her life that ended. It was her legacy as well. The reef, it changed after her passing. I took her place as the guardian, and while I carry her spirit with me, I can't help but feel like I'm still trying to live up to what she was. She was so much more than just a protector. She was a beacon, a guide, and I've been trying to fill those shoes ever since. Adrian's expression softened as he listened, the weight of Serena's confession settling over him like a blanket. He could see the toll it had taken on her, the burden she had carried all these years, silently grieving and struggling to maintain the delicate balance her mother had once held. As the firelight danced in his eyes, Adrian understood now why Serena had been so determined, so unwilling to show weakness. The curse that bound her was not just the challenge she faced. It was the legacy of a pain that had been passed down through generations. one she had inherited without choice. In that moment, Adrian made a vow to himself to stand beside Serena, not just as a partner in their mission, but as someone who would help her face the ghosts of the past and the curse that still haunted her. Adrian's voice was low, tinged with sympathy as he leaned in closer, his eyes filled with concern. The soft crackle of the fire between them was the only sound that punctuated the heavy silence, and his heart ached for Serena, whose pain was now laid bare before him. He had never fully understood the depth of her burden, the weight of the legacy that she carried with such quiet determination. He reached out, his hand resting gently on her shoulder, offering silent support as he spoke, his words fragile yet filled with care. "What happened to her?" he asked, the question more of a tender request for understanding than a mere inquiry. Serena's breath caught for a moment, her eyes flickering to the fire before they returned to the locket in her hand. The sadness in her gaze deepened as she hesitated, as if reliving the painful memories of her mother's final days. She exhaled slowly, gathering the strength to continue. She became weaker over time. She began, her voice steady but thick with emotion. The curse that bound her started to take its toll. It drained her energy, her will to live. But she didn't let it show, not at first. She kept up appearances, stayed strong for me, for the reef, and for everyone else who depended on her. But I could see the change in her, the way she started fading away, piece by piece. Serena paused, her hand trembling as she closed the locket, the weight of the memory closing around her. "The curse," she continued, her voice faltering as the words slipped out. "It's not just a physical affliction. It's an emotional one too. It pulls you into this endless cycle of responsibility, of being the guardian, and it makes you feel like you're never allowed to stop. It's like you're trapped in this role, bound to it, unable to truly live." Serena's eyes glazed over as she looked toward the horizon, as if the ocean might provide some sort of escape from the painful recollections. "My mother fought until the very end, but it was too much for her. She eventually collapsed, and I couldn't save her." Her voice trembled at the last words, and she blinked back the tears that threatened to spill. Adrian remained silent for a moment, absorbing her words. His chest felt heavy with the weight of Serena's grief, her loss so profound that it had shaped the very core of who she was. He had always known that the curse was a dark and powerful force, but hearing the personal toll it had taken on her family, on her mother, brought the reality of it into sharp focus. "I'm so sorry, Serena," he said softly, his voice thick with empathy. He squeezed her shoulder gently, trying to offer her some measure of comfort. "I can't imagine the pain you must have felt, losing her like that, and carrying this burden on your own. But I'm here now. You don't have to face it alone anymore." Serena's voice cracked as she spoke, the weight of her words pressing heavily on her chest. Her fingers clenched around the locket, the small token of her mother's memory feeling suddenly too heavy. She was taken by the darkness that overtook the heart of the reef. She continued, her eyes distant as if she were reliving the moment. The tears that had begun to well in her eyes shimmered in the firelight, reflecting the deep sorrow that seemed to reside in her very soul. She sacrificed herself to protect the reef, to keep the curse from spreading, but in doing so, she became part of it. She bound herself to the heart, unknowingly chaining herself to the very curse she fought to prevent. Her voice faltered, the magnitude of her mother's choice filling the silence that stretched between them. Adrian's heart tightened at her words, the pain in Serena's eyes unmistakable. He had known of the curse's power, but hearing the personal cost it exacted from her family, from her mother, filled him with a deep sense of sympathy. Serena had inherited more than just the title of guardian. She had inherited the burden of her mother's sacrifice, and the weight of that responsibility seemed to be suffocating her. His eyes softened as he gazed at her, wishing he could take away the pain that she carried so quietly. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words felt inadequate, lost in the enormity of her grief. "I inherited the mantle of the guardian," Serena went on, her voice growing softer, tinged with regret. "But also the burden of her fate. When she died, I thought I could do it, that I could carry on her work, protect the reef as she had. But the curse, it's like a shadow that follows me, and I can't escape it. Every decision I make, every step I take, feels like I'm walking in her footsteps, doomed to the same end. It's hard, Adrian. Her shoulders slumped, as if the very act of speaking these words drained the last bit of strength she had been holding on to. The fire crackled quietly between them, and she took a shaky breath, trying to steady herself. Adrian reached out, his hand gently resting on hers, offering her a silent but powerful gesture of support. He didn't know how to fix the pain Serena was carrying, but in this moment, he knew that sharing her burden, even in small ways, was the only thing he could do. "You're not your mother, Serena," he said softly, his voice firm but kind. "You're your own person, and you don't have to carry the weight of her fate alone. I'm with you, and we'll face this together." His words, though simple, were filled with conviction, a promise to stand by her as she navigated the impossible road ahead. Adrian's voice was thick with regret as he reached out and gently took Serena's hand in his. The warmth of his touch seemed to anchor her, grounding her in the midst of the emotional storm that had been swirling inside her. His fingers curled around hers, offering a comfort she hadn't realized she needed until this very moment. She looked up at him, her tear-streaked face softening at the sincerity in his expression. She had spent so long carrying this weight alone, keeping the truth buried deep inside, that hearing his sympathy, his understanding, felt like a release she hadn't known she needed. "I'm so sorry, Serena," Adrian said, his voice low and full of remorse. His eyes, filled with concern, never left hers as he spoke. "I had no idea what you were carrying, what you've been through. I should have known that there was more to this curse than just a mission. I should have asked sooner." His words were laced with guilt, the realization that he hadn't been fully aware of her inner turmoil settling heavily on him. He felt a deep pang of sorrow for not being there in the way she needed him to be, for not seeing the signs that something was wrong. Serena felt her chest tighten as the weight of his apology washed over her. She had kept so much of her pain hidden, convinced that no one could possibly understand the burden she carried. But now, with Adrian's gentle touch and heartfelt words, she felt a flicker of something different, hope, perhaps, or the possibility of healing. She knew that the path ahead was still fraught with challenges, but for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel quite so alone in it. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "I didn't want to burden you with it. I thought I could handle it on my own." Adrian squeezed her hand slightly, his thumb brushing over her knuckles in a reassuring gesture. "You don't have to carry this by yourself, Serena," he said, his voice steady with resolve. "We're in this together, no matter how difficult it gets. You don't have to hide your fears from me anymore." He leaned in slightly, his forehead just brushing against hers, a gesture of intimacy that spoke volumes more than words could express. In that moment, they both understood that their bond had shifted, strengthened by the shared vulnerability and the promise of support in the face of everything that lay ahead. Serena nodded slowly, her eyes dropping to their entwined hands, a subtle tremor running through her fingers as she spoke. Her voice was soft but filled with an undeniable intensity, as though every word carried the weight of years of silence. "It's a part of my life I rarely talk about," she began, her words trailing off for a moment, as if she were gathering the courage to continue. The vulnerability she had kept hidden for so long was bubbling to the surface, and with it came a surge of emotion that she could no longer contain. "I've always been afraid that sharing my fears would make me seem weak or vulnerable," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I thought if I kept it all inside, I could keep going, keep moving forward. But now, with everything we've been through, I can't keep it inside any longer." Adrian listened intently, his heart aching as he absorbed her confession. He had known Serena as someone strong, unshakable in the face of danger, always ready to push forward. But in that moment, he realized how much of that strength had come at the cost of her own well-being, how much she had been carrying alone. He could see the rawness in her expression, the vulnerability she was showing him now, and it struck him to his core. He could only imagine the weight of the burden she had borne for so long, and the relief she must have felt finally voicing it aloud. "Serena," he said gently, his voice full of understanding, You're not weak for feeling this way. You're human. And you're not alone in this anymore. The silence between them stretched for a few moments, filled with the unsaid but deeply felt understanding that had begun to form between them. Serena's gaze lifted from their hands, her eyes meeting Adrian's with a mixture of uncertainty and gratitude. She had always prided herself on being able to stand strong, to keep the pain hidden from the world. But now, in this shared moment of openness, she felt a new sense of freedom, a weight slowly lifting from her chest as she allowed herself to be seen for who she truly was, scars and all. I've been carrying my mother's legacy, she continued, her voice steadier now. But it's more than just the curse. It's the fear of failing, of becoming what she became. I'm terrified of losing myself in the darkness like she did. Adrian squeezed her hand gently, his thumb brushing over her skin in a gesture of silent support. You don't have to carry all of that by yourself, he said softly, his voice steady but filled with an emotion he couldn't quite name. You're not your mother, Serena. You're your own person, and you'll face this curse in your own way. I'm here, every step of the way, and we'll get through it together. His words were simple, but in that moment, they meant everything to Serena. The fear that had once kept her isolated, the fear that had kept her from truly opening up, began to fade, replaced by a deep sense of connection, one she knew would carry them both through whatever lay ahead. Serena's gaze lingered on Adrian, her eyes a delicate blend of sadness and hope. Her expression softened, and for the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to acknowledge the uncertainty that had been gnawing at her. I've also been afraid of what will happen if we don't succeed, she confessed, her voice fragile yet honest. The curse has been a part of my life for so long, it's almost become familiar. I've grown used to the idea of it being my fate, of it being something I could never escape. I've accepted it as something I had no control over, something that would always shadow me. She paused, her lips trembling slightly as she fought to keep her emotions in check. Adrian's heart tightened at her words, his understanding deepening. He had always known that Serena carried the weight of the curse, but he had never fully grasped the depth of her resignation, the way it had become a part of her very being. It was something she had lived with, quietly bearing the burden, not daring to dream of a future without it. But now, in the stillness of the night, he could see how deeply her fear ran, how much she had come to rely on the curse, even if it had shaped her in ways she never wanted. Serena let out a slow breath, her gaze shifting toward the distant horizon, as if searching for something she couldn't yet name. But now, she continued, her voice growing softer, with you by my side, I see a possibility for change, for breaking free from it, from everything that's kept me trapped. And that scares me just as much as it excites me. She glanced back at Adrian, her expression both vulnerable and filled with a flicker of something brighter, an ember of hope. I've never allowed myself to imagine a life without the curse, without this endless burden. And now that I can, I'm not sure if I'm ready for that. Adrian reached out, his hand gently brushing against hers, his touch grounding her in the present moment. You don't have to be ready all at once, he said softly, his words filled with compassion and understanding. It's okay to be scared, Serena. Change is always hard, especially when it means letting go of something that's been a part of you for so long. But you don't have to carry this alone anymore. Whatever comes, we'll face it together. I believe in you, and I believe in us. His words were simple, but in the quiet night, they held a depth that Serena had never felt before. For the first time in a long while, the fear that had kept her bound began to lose its hold, replaced by the strength of their shared resolve. Adrian's heart tightened with empathy as he listened to Serena's words, her vulnerability laid bare under the weight of the curse and the future they were attempting to change. He squeezed her hand gently, trying to convey all the support he felt for her in that simple touch. You're not alone in this, he said, his voice steady and full of conviction. I know we've faced countless challenges already, but we're in this together. Whatever happens, we'll face it side by side. His words were meant to reassure her, to remind her that she didn't have to carry the burden of the past alone. Serena turned to him, her eyes searching his face for any trace of doubt, but finding none. In that moment, his His unwavering certainty seemed to melt some of the fears that had plagued her for so long. She had never truly let herself lean on someone before, especially not in matters as deep and personal as this. Yet, with Adrian by her side, she felt something stir inside her, something she hadn't realized she'd been missing. It wasn't just the prospect of breaking the curse that was daunting. It was the idea of truly embracing the life that could exist beyond it. With Adrian's words, that life felt more possible than ever before. For a long moment, they simply sat in silence, the crackle of the fire their only companion as the night deepened around them. Serena let her gaze fall to their intertwined hands, the warmth of Adrian's grip a quiet anchor in the swirling sea of emotions she had been fighting to keep at bay. She had always feared that if she allowed herself to hope, it would only set her up for heartbreak. But Adrian's steadfast presence offered a different kind of promise, one that was grounded in action, not just words. She felt a flicker of courage, a spark of belief that maybe, just maybe, they could succeed. Adrian's expression softened as he watched Serena, sensing the quiet shift in her demeanor. He knew the journey ahead would still be fraught with dangers, both external and internal, but in that moment, he felt a profound sense of unity between them. They weren't just partners in their mission anymore, they were allies in their lives. "Whatever happens, we'll make it through," he repeated, this time with a firmness that matched the certainty he felt deep in his chest. Together, they would navigate the twists and turns of fate, face their fears head-on, and build something stronger than the curse that had once held them both captive. Serena's eyes softened, the tension in her shoulders easing as Adrian's words settled over her like a soothing balm. A small, grateful smile tugged at her lips, fragile yet genuine. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying a vulnerability she rarely let show. "I needed to hear that. I've been carrying the weight of my mother's legacy and my own fears for so long that I almost forgot what it felt like to share them with someone." Her gaze drifted to the fire, its flickering flames reflecting the flicker of hope within her. Adrian's presence was more than a comfort. It was a lifeline she hadn't realized she needed. For so many years, Serena had borne her burdens in silence, believing it was her duty to shoulder them alone. The legacy of her mother's sacrifice and the looming specter of the curse had felt like an immovable force, an unyielding destiny she was powerless to escape. But as she sat beside Adrian, she felt a shift, a lightness that came from speaking her fears aloud and knowing they were met with understanding instead of judgment. The loneliness that had haunted her began to wane, replaced by the quiet reassurance that she wasn't fighting this battle by herself. Adrian watched her closely, his heart swelling with admiration and empathy. He could see how much strength it had taken for her to admit her struggles, and it only deepened his respect for her. "You don't have to carry all of this on your own anymore," he said, his tone firm yet gentle. "We'll share the weight together, Serena. Your mother's legacy isn't just yours to bear, it's part of our fight now. And your fears? They don't make you weak. They make you human." His words lingered in the air, a promise and a truth that seemed to settle between them like a quiet bond. Serena turned back to Adrian, her smile growing just a little wider, her gratitude evident in her expression. For the first time in what felt like forever, she allowed herself to believe that she didn't have to face the future alone. "Sharing them with you makes me feel less alone," she repeated, her voice steadier this time. The crackle of the fire punctuated her words, its warmth mirroring the newfound connection between them. They sat there for a while longer, side by side, letting the unspoken understanding between them grow stronger as the night deepened, readying themselves for whatever lay ahead. Adrian leaned closer, his arms encircling Serena in a gentle embrace that spoke of both reassurance and solidarity. He held her as if anchoring her to the moment, his voice low and steady. "You don't have to carry it all by yourself," he said, the sincerity in his words wrapping around her as firmly as his arms. "We're partners in this quest, and that means sharing both the burdens and the hopes." The quiet conviction in his tone settled the air between them, dissipating the lingering tension and filling the space with an unspoken promise of unity. Serena hesitated at first, her body stiff with the instinct to maintain her guarded composure. But slowly, she allowed herself to relax against him. The warmth of his embrace was both foreign and deeply comforting, a reminder that she didn't have to face her struggles alone. "I'm not used to letting anyone in like this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But with you, it feels different. Like I can finally breathe." Her words carried a rawness that surprised even her, but the vulnerability felt less daunting with Adrian holding her so close. Adrian's hand moved in slow, soothing circles on her back, his steady presence grounding her. "That's what this is about," he said softly, his words a gentle murmur against the crackle of the fire. "Breathing, leaning on each other, and finding strength in the connection we have. We've already faced so much, Serena, together. And we'll keep doing that, no matter how heavy the road ahead gets." His grip tightened briefly, not in desperation, but in reassurance, as if solidifying the partnership they had just reaffirmed. For a moment, the world around them faded, the relentless weight of their quest temporarily lifted. Serena closed her eyes, savoring the rare sense of peace Adrian's presence brought her. She realized that the embrace wasn't just a physical gesture, it was a declaration, a reminder that they weren't just two individuals on a mission, but a team bound by trust and shared purpose. As she pulled back slightly to meet his gaze, there was a new light in her eyes, one of cautious hope and growing faith in their ability to face the trials ahead together. As they held each other, the warmth of their connection seemed to radiate outward, intertwining with the soft crackle of the fire and the rhythmic sound of the waves. The flickering glow illuminated their faces, highlighting the raw honesty they had unearthed. Serena felt the tension in her chest slowly begin to ease, replaced by an unfamiliar yet comforting sense of relief. For so long, she had carried her burdens in silence, her vulnerability locked away behind carefully constructed walls. Now, with Adrian's arms around her, she realized how liberating it was to share her fears with someone who truly understood. The moment felt fragile, as though it existed in a world separate from the chaos of their quest. Serena leaned into the embrace, her fingers lightly gripping the fabric of Adrian's shirt as if to anchor herself in this fleeting reprieve. "I didn't know how much I needed this," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "To feel understood, to not have to carry everything on my own." Her words lingered in the air, heavy with the weight of her guarded past but also laced with the hope that she might no longer have to face the future alone. Adrian's hold tightened slightly, a silent acknowledgement of her vulnerability and a promise that he would stand by her side. "You've been stronger than anyone should ever have to be," he said softly, his voice steady and full of conviction. "But you don't have to bear it all anymore. We'll face whatever comes next together, every fear, every challenge." The sincerity in his words filled the space between them, weaving a bond that felt unshakable despite the trials still awaiting them. As the fire continued to crackle, the night around them seemed to grow quieter, as if nature itself respected the intimacy of the moment. Serena finally pulled back slightly, her eyes meeting Adrian's. There was a newfound clarity in her gaze, a blend of gratitude and determination. "Thank you," she said, her voice steady despite the emotions swirling within her. "For being here, for letting me lean on you." Adrian offered a small, reassuring smile, and in that exchange, they found not only solace but also the strength to move forward, united in purpose and in trust. "I've been struggling with my own fears," Adrian confessed, his voice quiet and muffled against Serena's hair as he held her close. "I've always tried to be strong and focused, to give us both something steady to lean on. But the truth is, I've been scared too." His words hung in the air, raw and unguarded, as if they carried the weight of a secret he had long kept buried. He closed his eyes for a moment, as if bracing himself to continue. "I've been terrified of failing, of not being able to see this through, of letting you down when it matters most, and of what the future might look like if we don't succeed." Serena's arms tightened around him instinctively, her heart aching at the vulnerability in his voice. She pulled back just enough to look into his face, her expression a mixture of empathy and quiet strength. "Adrian," she said softly, her voice filled with a tender understanding, "you don't have to carry those fears alone. You've been so focused on protecting me, but it's okay to admit that you're afraid too." Her words were not a reproach but an offering, a reminder that their bond was built on mutual trust and support, not the impossible expectation of perfection. Adrian let out a shaky breath, the tension in his shoulders beginning to release. I didn't want to burden you with my own doubts, he admitted, his gaze searching hers for reassurance. You already have so much to bear, and I thought if I stayed strong enough, it might make it easier for you. His voice faltered, and he shook his head slightly, as if frustrated with himself. But I see now that hiding my fears didn't help either of us. If anything, it pushed us further apart. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining as if to solidify the unspoken promise of honesty and unity moving forward. Serena gave his hand a gentle squeeze, her lips curving into a small, reassuring smile. We're both scared, Adrian. That's what makes us human. But facing those fears together is what will make us stronger. Her words were steady, a quiet resolve underlying them. She reached up to brush a strand of hair from his face, her touch light but full of meaning. We've come this far because we've supported each other, even when it wasn't easy. We can keep going, but only if we trust each other enough to share the hard parts too. In that moment, the lingering tension between them began to dissolve, replaced by a shared understanding that their partnership was not about being fearless but about standing firm together, no matter what lay ahead. Serena pulled back slightly, her gaze meeting Adrian's with a depth of understanding that made the space between them feel smaller, almost non-existent. We both have fears and doubts, she said softly, her voice steady but laced with emotion. But it's not about pretending they don't exist. It's about facing them together. That's what makes us stronger, Adrian. Her words carried a quiet conviction, the kind that came from someone who had spent too long carrying their burdens alone and was finally ready to share the weight. Adrian felt the impact of her words settle deep in his chest. He nodded, the lines of tension on his face easing as her acceptance washed over him like a balm. You're right, he admitted, his tone filled with a newfound clarity. I've been so focused on keeping us moving forward that I forgot what truly matters. It's not just about completing the quest, it's about how we do it. Together. His hand found hers again, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that felt both grounding and uplifting. For the first time in what felt like ages, he allowed himself to breathe deeply, the weight of his self-imposed expectations lifting just enough to let hope in. Serena smiled faintly, a flicker of warmth breaking through the cloud of uncertainty that had lingered between them. We've both made mistakes, she said, her thumb brushing lightly over the back of his hand. But that doesn't mean we've failed. It means we're learning. And if there's one thing I've realized, it's that we're stronger when we lean on each other, not just when we try to shoulder everything alone. Her voice grew softer, but it didn't waver, every word carrying the strength of her resolve. The quiet determination in her eyes mirrored his, a shared acknowledgement that their partnership was built on trust, even in moments of doubt. The fire crackled softly beside them, its warm glow dancing across their faces as they sat in thoughtful silence for a moment longer. The weight of their conversation lingered, but it no longer felt suffocating. Instead, it felt like a necessary step toward healing the fractures that had begun to form. Adrian gave her hand a gentle squeeze, his expression softening. From now on, no more walls between us, he said with quiet determination. We face everything, fears, doubts, and challenges, together. Serena nodded, her smile growing as a sense of renewed strength settled between them. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in days, they felt ready to face it, side by side. Adrian nodded, his expression softening as he met Serena's gaze. His gratitude was unmistakable, a quiet yet powerful acknowledgement of her words. You're right, he said, his voice steady but laced with emotion. Facing these fears together is what will help us succeed. I've spent so much time trying to carry the weight of this mission on my own, thinking I had to be the strong one, but I see now how wrong that was. He paused, letting his words settle between them. We're stronger together, Serena. I truly believe that. Serena's lips curved into a faint smile, her earlier tension easing as she felt the sincerity in his words. And I believe in us too, she replied, her voice gentle yet resolute. I know this journey hasn't been easy, and there's so much ahead of us that feels we've come this far because we've leaned on each other, even when things seemed impossible. That's not something we should ever lose sight of. Her hand squeezed his lightly, a simple gesture that carried all the reassurance and determination she felt. The fire crackled softly beside them, its warmth a quiet comfort against the encroaching night. Adrian's gaze drifted momentarily to the horizon, where the last traces of sunlight were fading into deep blues and purples. I believe we can overcome anything as long as we have each other, he said, returning his attention to her. His voice carried a quiet conviction, the kind that didn't need to be shouted to be heard. No matter what lies ahead, whether it's more trials, more danger, or even more doubts, we'll face it together. I won't let my fears stop me from being the partner you deserve. Serena felt a swell of emotion at his words, a renewed strength that pushed back the shadows of doubt lingering in her mind. And I'll be here every step of the way, she promised, her voice steady. We'll face it all, Adrian. Together. Their hands remained intertwined, a tangible reminder of the bond they had fought to preserve. In the quiet glow of the firelight, their partnership felt unbreakable, a steady beacon of hope against the unknown challenges ahead. As the night deepened, they sat side by side, fortified by the knowledge that their strength came not from individual resolve, but from the unwavering connection they shared. As the evening deepened, Adrian and Serena found themselves immersed in a conversation that felt as natural as the gentle rhythm of the waves. Their earlier tension had faded, replaced by a sense of ease that allowed them to share openly. Adrian spoke of his dreams for the future, a future beyond the curse and the trials they faced. He imagined a world where they could live freely, unburdened by the weight of their responsibilities. Serena listened intently, her eyes soft with emotion, as he described his hopes of exploring distant shores, finding a place to call home, and perhaps creating something lasting together. Serena, in turn, shared her own dreams, her voice carrying a mix of vulnerability and quiet strength. She spoke of her longing to see the reef restored to its former glory, a vibrant haven for life and magic. She talked about her desire to honor her mother's legacy, not through sacrifice, but through renewal and healing. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a life beyond the curse, a life where she could embrace her own destiny rather than being shaped by the shadows of the past. Adrian's attentive presence gave her the courage to voice these desires, and with each word, she felt a weight lifting from her shoulders. Their fears and vulnerabilities also surfaced in the conversation, but they were met with understanding rather than judgment. Adrian admitted his lingering doubts about his own strength, and the fear of failure that had haunted him throughout their journey. Serena confessed her struggles with the responsibility she bore as the guardian of the reef and her uncertainty about what the future held. Yet, as they spoke, the act of sharing their innermost thoughts brought a sense of clarity and solidarity. They realized that their fears, while daunting, were manageable when faced together. By the time the moon rose high above them, its silvery light casting a serene glow over the reef, Adrian and Serena felt a renewed sense of trust and connection. The fire between them crackled softly, a comforting reminder of the warmth they had rekindled. Their heartfelt confessions had not only strengthened their emotional bond but also reminded them of why they had chosen to fight this battle together. As they prepared to rest for the night, the weight of their burdens felt a little lighter, and the path ahead seemed a little less daunting. With their hopes and fears laid bare, they knew they had found something invaluable in each other, a partnership capable of enduring even the greatest of trials. The night sky stretched out like a vast canvas, each star gleaming with an almost otherworldly radiance. The clarity of the heavens mirrored the clarity that now existed between Adrian and Serena. They sat side by side, gazing upward, their hearts lighter than they had felt in weeks. The shared vulnerability of the evening had stripped away the walls they had built around themselves, leaving only the trust and companionship that had always been at the core of their bond. In the stillness of the night, they found solace in the unspoken promise that they would face whatever lay ahead, together. Adrian's gaze lingered on the stars, a quiet determination taking root in his chest. The road ahead was fraught with peril, but for the first time in a long while, he felt a sense of calm resolve. Beside him, Serena's presence was a steadying force, her strength and courage as inspiring as the endless expanse of the sky above them. He reached for her hand, intertwining his fingers with hers in a simple yet profound gesture of unity. The warmth of her touch was a reminder that, no matter how dark the path became, they would always have each other as a source of light. Serena turned to look at Adrian, her lips curving into a small, genuine smile. The tension that had once weighed heavily on her had eased, replaced by a quiet but fierce sense of purpose. For so long, the curse and its demands had felt like a solitary burden, an inevitable fate she had to shoulder alone. But now, with Adrian beside her, she no longer felt isolated. Their connection had become her anchor, a source of strength that made the impossible seem just a little more attainable. The stars above, witnesses to their journey, seemed to shine brighter as if encouraging them to move forward. As the hours stretched on, the fire beside them dwindled to glowing embers, and the chill of the night began to settle. Yet neither of them moved to leave, reluctant to break the spell of the moment. The challenges ahead still loomed, but they no longer felt insurmountable. Their bond had been tested, and though it had bent, it had not broken. Instead, it had emerged stronger, infused with the knowledge that their combined strength and shared trust could overcome even the gravest of odds. Together, they rose from their spot, the starlight guiding their steps as they returned to their camp, ready to face whatever awaited them at dawn. Chapter 29: The Curse's Source. The night enveloped the reef in a hushed stillness, broken only by the soft crunch of sand beneath their boots and the faint murmur of distant waves. Overhead, the stars glittered like tiny shards of light scattered across the heavens, their brilliance reflected in the calm pools that dotted their path. Adrian and Serena moved with a purposeful rhythm, their steps guided by the muted glow of bioluminescent flora. These gentle lights, sprouting from the surrounding coral and rocks, bathed the path in an ethereal blue, creating an otherworldly beauty that contrasted with the gravity of their mission. Serena's satchel hung securely at her side, the heart stone nestled within. Though unseen, its presence was unmistakable, radiating a subtle warmth that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. She could feel its power resonating through the air, a constant reminder of its significance and the burden it carried. Her fingers occasionally brushed against the satchel's edge, as though reassuring herself of its safety. Adrian walked beside her, his lantern casting flickering shadows across the uneven terrain. Its light was faint compared to the glowing flora, but it gave him a sense of control in an environment that felt alive with mystery. Their path grew narrower as they ventured deeper into the reef. The towering coral formations around them cast strange, jagged silhouettes against the night sky, and the air carried a faint hum, as if the reef itself was alive and watchful. Adrian broke the silence, his voice low but steady. "We're close now," he said, glancing at Serena. "I can feel it." His words carried a mixture of anticipation and trepidation, reflecting the mix of emotions that had accompanied them since the start of their journey. Serena nodded, her own gaze fixed ahead, her expression unreadable but determined. As they continued, a faint mist began to rise, swirling around their ankles and lending the reef an even more surreal quality. The luminous plants seemed to glow brighter in the mist, their light dancing in fluid patterns that mirrored the ocean's currents. Adrian felt a pang of unease, his senses sharpening as he scanned their surroundings for any sign of danger. Despite the serene beauty of the scene, there was an underlying tension that neither of them could ignore. The Heartstone's power seemed to intensify, as if reacting to their proximity to the reef's heart. Finally, they reached a clearing where the path opened up into a vast expanse of water surrounded by glowing coral. In the center, a towering structure rose from the depths, its surface glistening as though it were encrusted with starlight. Serena's breath caught in her throat as she took in the sight. It was both magnificent and foreboding. Adrian stepped closer to her side, his lantern's light casting faint reflections across the water's surface. "This is it," Serena whispered, her voice filled with awe and determination. Together, they stood at the threshold of the reef's heart, ready to face whatever trials awaited them in the depths. Their emotional breakthrough had not only mended their bond but also brought a sharper clarity to their mission. Sitting under the stars that night, Adrian and Serena had pored over the fragments of ancient texts they had recovered, piecing together a narrative that hinted at the origin of the curse. The threads of history spoke of a profound betrayal, a guardian who had once protect the reef but had instead acted out of greed or desperation. Their actions had tainted the heart of the reef, turning it from a source of life into a vessel of darkness. This betrayal, steeped in sorrow and anger, had forged the curse that now bound Serena and threatened the reef's existence. As they journeyed deeper into the reef the following day, their conversation turned toward this revelation. "It wasn't just an act of betrayal," Serena said, her voice thoughtful as she navigated the uneven path. "It was a wound, a scar that never healed." The text suggests that the heart of the reef absorbed the pain and rage of that moment, and that's what gave the curse its power. Adrian nodded, his brow furrowed as he considered her words. If the curse is tied to the emotions of that event, maybe the key to breaking it lies in addressing those emotions, healing the wound rather than just trying to sever the curse. The idea filled them both with equal parts hope and apprehension. Healing a centuries-old scar was no small task, especially when its roots were shrouded in secrecy. As they walked, Serena's mind drifted to her mother, who had been consumed by the curse before her. Was her mother's spirit trapped within the heart's grasp, another victim of the betrayal? The thought sent a chill down her spine, but it also strengthened her resolve. "We have to find out more about this betrayal," she said firmly. "If we can understand it, understand why it happened and what it meant, we might have a chance." Their path led them to the remnants of an ancient altar, its surface covered in carvings and runes worn smooth by time. The air around it felt charged, as though the reef itself remembered the pain of the betrayal. Serena knelt before the altar, running her fingers over the faded symbols, trying to decipher their meaning. Adrian stood behind her, his eyes scanning the area for any sign of danger. "This must be where it all started," Serena murmured, her voice barely audible. "The guardian who turned against their duty, it happened here." She traced a particular rune that seemed to glow faintly under her touch, its light pulsing in rhythm with the heartstone in her satchel. Adrian crouched beside her, his hand resting on her shoulder. "If this is the origin, then this is where we'll find the truth," he said with quiet determination. They both knew that uncovering the truth would not be easy. It would likely force them to confront echoes of the betrayal and the emotions that had birthed the curse. But they were ready. Their bond, newly strengthened by their emotional breakthrough, would guide them through the challenges ahead. Together, they would unravel the mystery of the curse, not just to save the reef, but to honor the sacrifices of those who had come before and to create a future free of its shadow. Serena's voice broke the silence that had settled between them as they navigated the treacherous path toward the heart of the reef. Her words carried the weight of their mission, the knowledge they had gathered, and the daunting truth that lay ahead. "According to the records," she said, her voice steady despite the underlying tension, "the curse originated from an act of treachery by someone who once held great power over the reef. We need to find the exact source of this betrayal." She paused for a moment, her gaze sweeping across the darkening landscape. "Only then can we hope to break it." Adrian nodded, his jaw set in determination. The pieces of the puzzle were starting to fall into place, but the path to the answers was anything but clear. They had uncovered vague references to a betrayal so deep that it had twisted the heart of the reef into something dark and malevolent. But the details remained shrouded in mystery, as though the very nature of the act was too dangerous to be written in full. "Do the records say anything about who was responsible for the betrayal?" Adrian asked, his voice quiet but intense. Serena glanced down at the worn scroll she had been carrying, the ancient text now partially unfurled. "Not directly," she admitted. "It only mentions that the betrayal came from someone who once protected the heart, someone who was entrusted with its care and power. They abused their position for their own gain, allowing greed and ambition to cloud their judgment. The records hint that this person was once a guardian of the reef, like my mother." She stopped, her breath catching slightly at the mention of her mother. The weight of her legacy felt heavier now that the full extent of the curse's origin was coming into focus. "Do you think it could have been someone from your mother's time?" Adrian asked, his tone gentle as he reached out to place a reassuring hand on Serena's shoulder. The question hung in the air, a possibility that seemed both inevitable and devastating. Serena's mother had been a powerful and noble guardian, one who had sacrificed herself for the reef. Could her own mother have been betrayed by someone she had once trusted? Or had the betrayal been far more personal than they realized? Serena's heart was heavy with the possibility, but she steeled herself against the flood of emotions that threatened to overwhelm her. "It's possible," she said softly, "but I don't know. What I do know is that whatever happened back then has left a scar on this place, on the heart itself. If we want to break the curse, we need to understand who was involved and what their motives were. Only then can we hope to heal the reef, and me." She straightened, her resolve solidifying. The path forward would be difficult, but she was ready to face it with Adrian by her side, determined to uncover the truth and end the curse once and for all. Adrian's eyes flicked across the shadowy landscape, his senses sharp as he took in the winding path ahead. The path they were following was treacherous, the bioluminescent flora casting an eerie glow on the jagged rocks and the deep water that stretched out beneath them. His thoughts were focused on the ancient texts they had studied, the cryptic writings that spoke of a hidden chamber beneath the reef. The temple's records mentioned a hidden chamber beneath the reef, Adrian said, his voice steady, though the weight of the task ahead hung heavy in his tone. "A place where the betrayal was sealed with dark magic. If we can find it, we might uncover the truth." Serena kept pace beside him, her gaze narrowed, scanning the surrounding waters as if the answers they sought might emerge from the depths. The path they walked was narrow and treacherous, the rocks slick with moisture and seaweed. The air felt dense with the weight of history, and the faint scent of salt water and earth mingled in her lungs. She could feel the pulsing resonance of the heartstone in her satchel, a constant reminder of the immense power they were dealing with. If the betrayal was sealed with dark magic, it might have left a trace, she murmured, her voice tinged with both fear and hope. "Maybe we can find that trace, some mark left by the magic." Adrian's expression grew more focused, his mind already turning over the possibilities. He had spent countless hours poring over the texts with Serena, trying to piece together fragments of forgotten history. The records spoke of an event so powerful that it had corrupted the very core of the reef, twisting the heart into something far darker. But there was little detail, only that the betrayal had occurred in the deepest chamber, hidden from sight, its secrets guarded by the magic that had been placed over it. "There has to be a way," Adrian said with a quiet determination. "If we can find the chamber, we can uncover the truth and use it to break the curse. But we need to move carefully. This place is ancient, and the magic here is unpredictable." Serena nodded, feeling the weight of the decision settling within her. She knew that uncovering the truth behind the betrayal wasn't just about breaking the curse. It was about understanding the forces that had shaped her life and her destiny. The records say the chamber lies beneath the reef, but they don't mention how to find it. The temple's power is linked to the Heartstone. It might give us a way in, she said thoughtfully. But we'll have to be careful. Whatever was done in that chamber has twisted the magic, and if we're not prepared... She trailed off, her mind unwilling to complete the thought. The silence that followed was heavy with unspoken fears, but it was also filled with resolve. Adrian reached out, placing a steady hand on Serena's shoulder. "We'll face it together," he said, his words simple but laden with meaning. "Whatever we find, we'll figure it out. We're not walking this path alone." His words steadied Serena, and she found strength in the quiet conviction of his tone. They were partners, and together, they would find the chamber, uncover the secrets of the past, and if they were lucky, begin the process of undoing the darkness that had bound them both for so long. The sound of distant water flowing echoed through the stillness as Adrian and Serena approached the edge of the vast underwater canyon. The massive walls rose before them like ancient sentinels, their jagged contours casting long shadows in the dim light. The canyon's depths seemed to swallow the light that filtered through the water, and an eerie silence hung in the air, broken only by the occasional ripple of the current. Serena felt a shiver run down her spine as she stared into the dark abyss below, the weight of what lay hidden within the canyon pressing heavily on her chest. This was no ordinary place. It was a sanctuary for secrets long forgotten, a vault of ancient history and betrayal. The very walls seemed to whisper the stories of the past, tales of those who had walked this path before them and never returned. Serena's hand tightened around the heart stone in her satchel, feeling its subtle pulse against her skin as if it too recognized the significance of this place. With a determined breath, she motioned for Adrian to follow her, leading him along the canyon's edge where the rocks grew more uneven and treacherous. The water around them became darker as they moved further into the depths, the sunlight above them slowly fading into nothing. At the base of the canyon, the terrain changed, and Serena's sharp eyes caught sight of something hidden in the shadow of a massive coral formation. "There," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. "The entrance is just beyond the reef. It's easy to miss if you're not looking closely." They swam closer, and Adrian's heart quickened as they approached the concealed entrance Serena had spotted. The doorway was partially obscured by thick layers of coral and swaying seaweed, so perfectly camouflaged with the surrounding rock that it could have been easily overlooked by anyone unfamiliar with the area. Serena's hand moved with practiced precision, parting the seaweed gently, revealing the dark passage beyond. The opening was narrow, and the air inside felt heavy with the staleness of centuries. Despite the natural beauty that surrounded them, there was something unnerving about the entrance, as if it were a portal to a place that had been shut away for good reason. Serena hesitated for a moment, then looked at Adrian, her gaze steady but filled with an unspoken tension. "This is it," she said, the weight of her words sinking in. The heart stone's faint glow seemed to flicker in resonance with the intensity of the moment. "Beyond this entrance is the chamber where it all began, the place where the betrayal was sealed. We'll need to be cautious. Whatever magic lingers here is ancient, and it's not likely to be forgiving." Her voice was steady, but the unease in her eyes mirrored Adrian's own growing apprehension. They had come this far, but the path ahead promised to be more perilous than anything they had encountered before. Serena glanced one last time at Adrian, her expression a mixture of resolve and quiet fear. "Are you ready?" Adrian nodded, his pulse quickening as he took a step forward, feeling the pull of the unknown with every movement. The entrance beckoned them, but it was impossible to ignore the heavy atmosphere of ancient power that radiated from within. The silence that filled the space around them was suffocating, and the faintest sound of water trickling from within the cavern echoed in the dark recesses of the canyon. They could not turn back now, not when they were so close. Together, they entered the narrow passage, moving with careful precision as the walls around them grew tighter, the water colder. The deeper they went, the stronger the presence of the heart stone seemed to become, its energy vibrating in the air, guiding them toward the hidden truth that awaited them at the end of this dark journey. Serena's voice echoed softly through the narrow passage, bouncing off the slick stone walls that pressed in around them. The air grew heavier as they advanced, thick with the ancient weight of forgotten secrets. The further they descended, the more the oppressive silence seemed to consume them, leaving only the sound of their steady breaths and the faint current flowing through the rock. The passage itself was tight, and the water around them chilled with each passing moment, sending a shiver down Serena's spine. Despite the determination she tried to maintain, a sense of foreboding gnawed at the back of her mind. The heartstone, resting against her side, pulsed faintly in response to the unseen force ahead. It was as though the very magic of the curse was alive within these walls, waiting for them to uncover the truth. Adrian moved beside her, his eyes scanning the darkened path ahead. His usual confidence seemed tempered by the gravity of the situation, but there was no question in his mind. They had come too far to turn back now. His hand instinctively rested on the hilt of his sword, a comforting reminder of the strength they had fought with up to this point. Despite the danger they knew lay ahead, the bond between them felt stronger than ever. They weren't just partners in this quest, they were each other's anchor, and nothing could break that resolve. Still, there was an underlying tension in the air, an unspoken understanding that this moment held far more significance than they fully grasped. The further they moved, the more the passage seemed to shift, its natural curves growing sharper and the walls growing more jagged. In some places, the rock formations were covered with strange, phosphorescent markings that glowed faintly, casting an eerie light across the tunnel. The markings seemed to pulse in time with the heartstone, their rhythm matching the quickening beat of Serena's heart. She couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched by unseen eyes, that the very walls of this ancient place were alive with the memory of betrayal. Her thoughts drifted back to the ancient texts, to the stories of those who had once come here, the ones who had failed to stop the curse. Their fate was a warning, one she hoped they could avoid. Eventually, the tunnel began to open up, revealing a large chamber ahead. The moment they stepped into the room, the oppressive atmosphere changed, becoming more intense. A strange energy hummed in the air, thick with the presence of dark magic. The chamber itself was vast, its ceiling disappearing into darkness, and its floor covered in strange, smooth stones that glowed with an inner light. At the far end of the chamber, an altar stood, bathed in the soft glow of bioluminescent moss, its surface marked with ancient runes that seemed to pulse with an unnatural life. It was here, Serena knew, that the betrayal had taken place, that the curse had been sealed. But the question remained, who had been the one to commit this act of treachery? And what would they find when they uncovered the truth? Serena's grip on the heartstone tightened, its resonance now pulsing almost in sync with her racing heart. She looked at Adrian, her eyes filled with both determination and fear. This was it, the moment they had both dreaded and sought. Whatever lay ahead, they had no choice but to face it together. The truth, for better or worse, was waiting for them in this chamber. The betrayal that had trapped Serena in its grasp for so long would finally be revealed, and the weight of its history would no longer be able to haunt her alone. "Are you ready?" she asked, her voice steady but laced with the tension of what was to come. Adrian nodded, his resolve as unwavering as hers. Together, they took a step toward the altar, ready to confront the darkness that had bound the reef and their fates. As they descended through the narrow entrance, the passage gradually widened, leading them deeper into the heart of the hidden chamber. The air grew heavier with each step, thick with the scent of ancient stone and salt water. The walls around them were adorned with murals, their colors faded with time but still hauntingly vivid in their depiction. Scenes of intense battles and moments of sorrow unfolded before their eyes, painted in meticulous detail. Warriors clashed beneath a stormy sky, their faces twisted in pain and rage, while figures cloaked in shadow whispered betrayals into the ears of trusted allies. The murals told the story of a once great civilization brought to its knees by treachery, their fates sealed in this very chamber. The weight of the history pressed on Serena and Adrian as they moved further into the space, each step feeling like they were walking through the echoes of forgotten souls. The murals continued around the chamber, wrapping their way across the walls in a continuous, tragic narrative. Serena felt an unease settle deep within her, as if the figures in the paintings were watching her, their eyes filled with silent warnings. The history of betrayal and loss seemed to have left an indelible mark on the very stones of the chamber, and it was clear that whatever had transpired here had forever altered the course of the reef's fate. The air seemed to hum with the weight of the curse, and Serena couldn't shake the feeling that this place was alive, that the secrets it held had been waiting for them. Adrian walked silently beside her, his gaze fixed on the murals, his hand brushing lightly against the stone as though trying to absorb the stories embedded within it. As they moved deeper into the chamber, their steps slowed in reverence. At the center of the room, a stone pedestal stood, worn by time yet remarkably intact. The pedestal was intricately carved with symbols and figures, the craftsmanship both beautiful and eerie in its precision. Resting upon the pedestal was a weathered scroll, its parchment yellowed with age and edges curled with the weight of centuries. The scroll was unlike any other Serena had ever seen, bound in an ancient material that seemed to pulse with a faint energy. The hard stone at her side reacted, its resonance growing stronger as they approached the pedestal, as though it recognized the presence of something powerful and long forgotten. Serena's breath caught in her throat as she stepped closer, her heart pounding in her chest. The scroll seemed to call to her, its presence heavy with a sense of inevitability. She reached out, fingers trembling, and slowly unrolled the ancient parchment. The text was written in a language she recognized but had never fully understood. It was a language of power, of old magic, and the words seemed to shimmer and shift as though alive with their own energy. Adrian stood beside her, his eyes scanning the room for any signs of danger, but his focus was just as riveted on the scroll as hers. Together, they read the ancient words, piecing together the fragments of history that had long been buried beneath the surface of the reef. As they deciphered the text, a story began to unfold, one of a betrayal so profound that it had altered the very essence of the reef itself. A powerful figure, once a protector of the seas, had succumbed to greed and darkness, using forbidden magic to bind the heart of the reef with a curse that would last for generations. This betrayal had not only tainted the natural balance of the waters but had also ensnared those chosen to guard the reef, including Serena's mother. The curse, it seemed, was a lingering consequence of that ancient act, and breaking it would require confronting the darkness at the heart of the betrayal. Serena and Adrian exchanged a silent look, understanding that the path ahead was far more dangerous than they had imagined, but they were resolute. Whatever the cost, they would face the truth of this betrayal and end the curse that had bound them all. Serena's fingers trembled as she reached out to grasp the edges of the ancient scroll. The weight of it felt both delicate and heavy in her hands, as though it carried the burden of centuries of forgotten knowledge. The faint hum of the heartstone in her satchel grew stronger as she carefully lifted the scroll from the pedestal, its energy seeming to resonate with the powerful magic contained within the words. Her breath caught in her throat, and for a moment she hesitated, as if the very act of touching the scroll might awaken something long dormant in the chamber. Her gaze flickered over the intricate carvings on the pedestal, the images of betrayal and sorrow etched into the stone, and she wondered if this was the moment everything would change. Adrian stood beside her, his expression a mix of awe and unease. His hand instinctively moved to the hilt of his sword, as though prepared for any danger that might arise from disturbing the sacred relic. He couldn't shake the feeling that the chamber was alive, that it was watching them, waiting for them to uncover the secrets that had been buried for so long. His gaze flickered from the scroll in Serena's hands to the murals on the walls, which seemed to tell a story of pain and loss that mirrored the tension building between them. As much as he trusted Serena, as much as he knew she had the strength to handle what lay ahead, the sense of foreboding in the chamber was undeniable. With a deep breath, Serena unrolled the scroll slowly, revealing the faded text written in an ancient, flowing script. The words seemed to shimmer under her touch, as though the parchment itself was alive with energy. The deeper she read, the more she felt the weight of the curse and the betrayal it described. The text told of a guardian, someone tasked with protecting the heart of the reef, who had betrayed their people in pursuit of forbidden power. The betrayal had not only cursed the heart, but it had also bound the guardians to an endless cycle of suffering. Serena's heart sank as she recognized the depth of the darkness they were dealing with. This wasn't just a curse, it was the foundation of the very struggle she had been facing her entire life. As Serena continued reading, she could feel Adrian's presence beside her, the silent support of his unwavering belief in their mission grounding her. His quiet strength steadied her as the words on the scroll painted a chilling picture of what had come before. The betrayal had been born from greed, from a thirst for power that had poisoned the very core of the reef. It was a betrayal so deep that it had torn apart the fabric of the very magic that had once protected their world. Serena's thoughts drifted to her mother, the guardian who had fought and ultimately sacrificed herself to stop the darkness from spreading further. The weight of that loss threatened to overwhelm her, but she pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. This was bigger than her, bigger than even her mother's sacrifice. They had to end it. The final lines of the scroll brought a sense of urgency. The curse could only be undone by confronting the source of the betrayal, by finding the dark magic that had been used to seal the heart of the reef. Serena knew in her heart that this was their moment, the moment when everything could be made right, but it would not come without great risk. As she carefully rolled the scroll back up, she looked to Adrian, their eyes locking in silent understanding. The journey ahead would not be easy, and there was still much unknown, but they now knew what they had to do. Together, they would find the source of the darkness and break the curse, no matter the cost. The scroll might hold the answers we need, Adrian said, his voice low but steady. His eyes were focused on Serena as she held the ancient parchment, the flickering light of their lanterns casting shadows across the stone walls. There was a quiet urgency in his tone, a sense that time was slipping away as they stood on the edge of something momentous. He could feel the tension in the air, thick with the weight of the secrets the scroll might uncover, and he knew that their next steps were critical. Every part of this journey had led them here, to this very moment where the truth of the curse, and the betrayal at its heart, lay just beyond their reach. Serena nodded, though her heart fluttered with a mix of excitement and fear. The ancient text in her hands seemed to hum with a low, almost imperceptible energy, as though the very act of unrolling it could unleash something both powerful and dangerous. She had never felt such a potent connection to the history of the reef before, to the forces that had shaped her destiny and that of those who had come before her. Her fingers trembled slightly as she began to read aloud, the words unfamiliar and laced with ancient magic, but there was a resonance in her voice that grounded them both. As the language of her ancestors filled the space between them, the murals on the chamber walls seemed to shift and move, as though acknowledging the power of the words spoken. Adrian watched her closely, his breath steady despite the mounting sense of dread that lingered in the chamber. He could see the way the words affected her, the subtle tension in her posture as she processed the text. Each sentence seemed to draw her deeper into the story of the betrayal, a story that now tied them both to the dark magic that had tainted the heart of the reef. He could feel the curse's grip tightening, and yet there was a flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they were close to unraveling the mystery. His thoughts drifted to the dangers they had already faced, to the moments when it seemed like they might not survive. But this felt different. It felt like the beginning of an end, and that was something he could not turn away from. As Serena read on, the details of the betrayal began to unfold. The scroll described a guardian, much like Serena, who had once been entrusted with protecting the heart of the reef. This guardian had been seduced by the promise of greater power, and in their hunger for control, they had betrayed their people, casting a dark spell that twisted the reef's magic into something unnatural. The curse that followed had ensnared the guardian's soul, and it had been passed down through the generations, affecting every protector who took the mantle. The more Serena read, the clearer it became that her mother's death, and Serena's own connection to the curse, had been part of a much larger, darker story. It wasn't just about her mother's sacrifice. It was about a cycle that needed to be broken. With a final, steady breath, Serena finished reading the last of the scroll's text. Her mind raced as the weight of what she had learned settled in her chest. The curse could only be broken by confronting the very magic that had bound the heart of the reef, by finding the source of the betrayal and undoing the dark spell that had seeped into the waters. It would not be easy, and the risk of failure loomed large, but Serena felt a new determination rising within her. She knew now that the only way forward was to face the past, to confront the betrayal head-on. Looking up at Adrian, she found a sense of clarity in his gaze. This was their fight now, not just hers, not just his, but theirs together. And no matter what, they would see it through. Serena unfurled the scroll slowly, the ancient parchment crackling softly as it unfurled in her hands. The faded ink was a testament to the passage of centuries, yet the writing remained legible, its words carrying the weight of history. As her eyes traced the text, she felt the deep connection to the past, to the ancestors whose lives had been shaped by the same curse that had ensnared her. The language was old, laced with an archaic beauty, but the story it told was dark and sorrowful. The first lines spoke of a time long ago, when the reef flourished, its waters teeming with life and magic. But beneath this vibrant harmony, there was a growing tension, a subtle undercurrent of discord. The sorcerer, once a revered guardian of the reef, had been corrupted by an overwhelming desire for power. His jealousy of the heart of the reef's untapped magic had festered until it consumed him. The sorcerer's transformation from protector to betrayer was painted in vivid strokes of ambition and greed. As Serena read, she imagined the guardian, once proud and noble, now a twisted figure blinded by the allure of power. He had spent years studying the ancient magics that protected the reef, seeking to unlock its deepest secrets. But what had once been a noble quest for understanding became an obsession. The heart of the reef, a source of immeasurable energy, was the key to his dreams of ultimate control. The sorcerer, in his envy, sought to seize that power for himself, willing to destroy anything that stood in his way. Serena felt a pang in her chest as she thought of her own role as the current guardian, inheriting a mantle shaped by this tragic betrayal. The sorcerer's actions had torn the very fabric of the reef's magic, unsealing a dark force that had been bound for millennia. The text described the curse in chilling detail, how the sorcerer's greed had unleashed a malevolent energy that corrupted the heart of the reef. The once vibrant coral gardens had withered, the waters had soured, and the merfolk who had once thrived were left in misery. The curse had slowly spread, its tendrils weaving into the very bones of the reef, affecting every guardian who came after the sorcerer. The once beautiful waters had become poisoned, the life-giving magic tainted. Serena's heart ached as she realized that the very curse she sought to break had been the result of one selfish act, a betrayal that had reverberated through generations. The scroll also spoke of the sorcerer's fate, a grim ending that had been sealed by his own treachery. In his final moments, as the magic he had sought to control turned against him, the sorcerer had been consumed by the very forces he had unleashed. His soul, bound to the curse, became part of the reef's corruption, his presence still lingering in the dark corners of the waters. The text suggested that the sorcerer's spirit had never truly left, his influence felt in the ebb and flow of the tides, ever present and insidious. The weight of this revelation pressed down on Serena, knowing that the ghost of the past had been influencing the present. She wondered if her mother had known this when she had taken up the mantle, whether she had felt the same oppressive presence that now haunted Serena's every step. With the final lines of the scroll, Serena learned the truth. The curse could only be undone by confronting the heart of the reef itself. The path to breaking the curse lay through the very magic that had been corrupted. Only by undoing the betrayal's source, by confronting the sorcerer's lingering essence, could the heart of the reef be restored. Serena felt a surge of determination. This was her fight, her responsibility. She wasn't just the guardian by title, she was the one who could break the cycle of suffering. She looked up at Adrian, her eyes resolute. They had found the source, the truth of the curse, and now they knew what had to be done. Together, they would face the sorcerer's lingering power, and they would restore the heart of the reef. Serena's voice trembled as she read aloud the first lines of the ancient text, the weight of the words sinking deep into her heart. The sorcerer, once revered as a protector of the reef, had been a figure of respect and authority. His knowledge of the ancient magics had made him an essential guardian of the waters, a force that upheld the delicate balance between the merfolk and the magic of the reef. But as Serena continued, the words painted a darker picture, one of a man whose pride and ambition slowly overshadowed the very qualities that had made him a trusted leader. The sorcerer's thirst for power had driven him to seek knowledge beyond what was meant to be known, to harness magic that was dangerous and forbidden. His desire for control over the heart of the reef, the source of all its strength, had consumed him entirely. Serena could feel the sorrow in the text, each word a reminder of the tragic downfall of a once great protector. The sorcerer had been blinded by his desire to possess the heart's power for himself. In his quest, he had turned against the very people he was sworn to protect, betraying the trust of his fellow guardians. His ambition had not only destroyed his own soul but had unleashed a curse that spread throughout the reef, infecting it with a dark, malevolent magic. The reef, once a thriving sanctuary, had become a shadow of its former self, its vibrant waters now tainted with corruption. Serena paused, her heart aching for the sorcerer's fall, and for the generations of guardians who had been forced to inherit the burden of his betrayal. The words in the scroll revealed the depth of the sorcerer's treachery. He hadn't simply sought power for personal gain, he had bound the curse directly to the heart of the reef, ensuring that the source of all life and magic within the waters would be irrevocably damaged. The heart was no longer just a beacon of strength, it had become a prison, its magic forever tainted by the sorcerer's actions. Serena's chest tightened as she realized that the very force that had given her strength, the heart of the reef, was also the source of her curse. The very thing she had sworn to protect had been marred by the same betrayal that had defined the sorcerer's legacy. As Serena read on, the text detailed the consequences of the sorcerer's actions. The curse that he had unleashed wasn't a simple spell, it was a binding force, intricately woven into the fabric of the reef. It had affected not just the physical world, but the spiritual realm as well, creating an imbalance that disrupted the lives of the merfolk and guardians alike. The curse's grip had never loosened, as each new guardian inherited the same fate, forced to carry the burden of the heart's corrupted power. Serena could almost feel the weight of generations of grief and loss, knowing that her mother, too, had faced this cruel inheritance. The curse was not just a remnant of the past, it was a living, breathing force, one that shaped the present and threatened the future. Serena's eyes narrowed as she reached the final part of the scroll. The curse could not be undone through simple magic or rituals. It required something far more profound. The sorcerer's betrayal needed to be confronted directly, and the heart of the reef had to be cleansed of its corruption. Only by uncovering the full truth of the sorcerer's actions, by breaking the bond he had created between himself and the heart, could the curse be lifted. Serena closed the scroll with a mixture of determination and fear. This was the challenge she had been dreading, but it was also the only path forward. She had to face the past, confront the lingering darkness of the sorcerer's legacy, and restore balance to the reef. She wasn't alone in this fight. Adrian was with her, and together they would find a way to heal the heart of the reef and end the cycle of suffering. Adrian's brow furrowed as the weight of the revelation sank in. The magnitude of the sorcerer's actions, the deliberate nature of his betrayal, became painfully clear. He had thought, for a long time, that the curse was simply a consequence of bad luck, something mysterious and chaotic that they had been caught up in. But now, as the truth emerged from the ancient text, it was evident that the sorcerer's treachery had been a calculated act, meant to create chaos, to tear apart the foundation of the very world they had sworn to protect. His ambition had been fueled by an insatiable desire for power, and the reef had been nothing more than a pawn in his twisted scheme. The heart of the reef, the very life force that sustained them all, had been corrupted by the sorcerer's greed. Adrian clenched his fists, a deep sense of anger and betrayal swirling inside him. Serena could see the storm brewing in Adrian's eyes. The realization that the curse had been no accident, that it had been planted intentionally, caused a deep sense of injustice to well up within him. This wasn't just some random tragedy. This was the result of a malevolent choice, one made by someone who had been entrusted with the reef's safety. Adrian's mind raced as he considered the consequences of that betrayal. It wasn't just the sorcerer's ambition that had caused harm. It was the ripple effect, the ongoing suffering of the merfolk, the generations of guardians like Serena who had been forced to carry the curse. The reef had been slowly dying, its magic slowly withering, all because one individual had sought to exploit its power for his own gain. Adrian's voice was low, filled with a grim understanding as he spoke again. He didn't just want to gain power for himself. He wanted to destroy the balance, to bring the reef under his control in a way that no one could challenge him. This was never just about personal gain. It was about breaking the heart of the very land we're trying to protect. The magnitude of the sorcerer's betrayal was more devastating than Adrian had imagined. The heart of the reef wasn't just a symbol of strength. It was the cornerstone of the ecosystem, the life force that kept everything in balance. By poisoning that heart, the sorcerer had launched a plan that went far beyond personal vendettas. He had set the stage for the reef's collapse, and in doing so, he had condemned generations of merfolk and guardians to live with the consequences of his actions. As the weight of these revelations hung in the air, Serena's gaze remained fixed on the scroll, her hands trembling ever so slightly. She had always known, deep down, that the curse was more than a random twist of fate, but hearing the full extent of the betrayal was something different. It wasn't just a curse they were trying to break, it was the result of an intentional, calculated act meant to undo the very heart of the reef's existence. For all the centuries of suffering and confusion, this betrayal had set the course for everything that had come after. And now, Serena understood that to end the curse, they would have to confront this act of destruction at its very core. Adrian looked at Serena, his eyes dark with resolve. He could see the turmoil within her, the recognition that this wasn't just a matter of breaking the curse. It was about confronting the force that had set everything in motion. We're not just dealing with the curse itself anymore. We're up against the consequences of that betrayal. The heart of the reef, its corruption, its pain, it's all tied to that moment, and to the sorcerer who betrayed us all. He reached out, placing a hand on her shoulder, offering her a silent vow of solidarity. But we can fix it. Together, we can right this wrong. We'll find a way to restore balance, to heal what was broken, and to put an end to this curse once and for all. The determination in Adrian's voice resonated in the stillness of the chamber, offering a glimmer of hope amidst the dark history they had uncovered. Serena's gaze shifted to the heartstone lying within her satchel, its soft glow pulsing as though in response to the conversation. The weight of their discovery settled heavily in her chest, but she didn't flinch. Her mother had warned her about the consequences of this curse, but now, with the truth laid out before them, she understood the full scale of the task ahead. The heart of the reef was not simply a magical artifact to be protected. It was the very lifeblood of their world. To restore it, they would have to undo the sorcerer's dark magic, the very magic that had seeped into every crevice of the reef, corrupting its essence. The thought of confronting that evil, of diving into the depths of that ancient malevolent force, both terrified and steeled her resolve. Adrian's expression mirrored Serena's, his jaw clenched in determination. He could feel the gravity of the situation settle over them, the enormity of the task weighing down on his shoulders. Restoring the heart of the reef would require more than just defeating an enemy. It would require unraveling centuries of malevolent power, confronting the twisted remnants of the sorcerer's curse, and ultimately, redeeming a world that had been scarred by betrayal. He had thought their journey would be difficult, but this revelation had brought a new level of urgency. They couldn't afford to hesitate. The reef, and all who lived within it, depended on their success. "We'll need more than just the Heartstone," he said, his voice steady but tinged with the understanding of the challenge ahead. "We'll need to find the source of the sorcerer's power, wherever it's hidden, and break it." Serena nodded again, the resolve in her eyes hardening as she stood tall. "The sorcerer's dark magic is woven deep into the reef, into its very heart. To break it, we'll have to confront the source of his betrayal directly. We can't just remove the curse. We have to cleanse the corruption from the very foundation of the reef." Her words felt heavy as they hung in the air, a reflection of the monumental task ahead. She had always known that her mother's legacy came with an immense burden, but now the burden felt even more pressing. The idea of cleansing such a deep-rooted evil, of confronting the very magic that had poisoned her people's home, was overwhelming. Yet there was no choice. It was the only way to restore balance, and she couldn't let fear stop her from doing what was necessary. Adrian stepped closer, placing a reassuring hand on Serena's shoulder, grounding her in the moment. "We've come this far, Serena. We've already faced countless dangers together, and we're still standing. If anyone can undo what's been done, it's us. Together, we can face the source of that magic and destroy it." His voice was full of conviction, as though his words could cut through the very darkness they were about to face. He believed in her strength, in the strength of their partnership. The road ahead would be perilous, and there was no certainty that they would succeed, but the bond they had forged in their shared struggles would guide them. This was no longer just about breaking a curse. It was about healing a wounded world, about honoring the sacrifices made and the legacy left behind. Serena met his gaze, feeling the warmth of his presence and the sincerity in his words. The weight of their mission pressed down on her, but in that moment, she felt a flicker of hope. They weren't alone in this. They were partners, and together, they could overcome the impossible. With a deep breath, Serena gathered her resolve. "You're right. We'll face this together, no matter what it takes. We won't let the sorcerer's legacy define the reef any longer. We'll restore its heart." As she spoke, the determination in her voice was unwavering. The path ahead would be treacherous, filled with obstacles and dangers, but Serena knew they had one thing that the sorcerer had never anticipated: the strength of their bond. And that would be their greatest weapon. Adrian's gaze lingered on the murals, his eyes tracing the intricate carvings that told the story of the sorcerer's rise to power and his eventual betrayal. The walls seemed to pulse with an eerie energy, as if the ancient magic still lingered, woven into the very stone. Each mural depicted scenes of the sorcerer's treachery, his face twisted with greed and malice, as he turned on those who once trusted him. The betrayal had not been a simple act of disloyalty. It had been a calculated decision, one born from an insatiable thirst for power. Adrian could feel the weight of the history pressing down on him as he took in the details. Every scene was a reminder of the devastation caused by the sorcerer's actions. And now, it seemed that this very history held the key to undoing the curse that had plagued the reef for centuries. His thoughts were interrupted as Serena moved closer to the murals, her hand brushing against the cool stone as she studied the images. The sorcerer's downfall was portrayed in vivid detail. Betrayed by his own ambition, he had met a tragic end. Yet the final image was the most unsettling. It showed a figure standing before the heart of the reef, surrounded by dark tendrils of magic that seemed to emanate from the stone itself. This figure, the sorcerer, was depicted with his hands raised in a final attempt to control the power of the Heartstone, but it was clear from the way the tendrils coiled around him that he had failed. His actions had irrevocably linked the Heartstone to the curse, and in his death, he had inadvertently ensured that the reef would suffer for generations to come. Serena's brow furrowed as she analyzed the details, her mind racing to make sense of the ritual described in the scroll. "There's something here," Serena said, her voice low but intense. The murals show that the sorcerer's downfall wasn't just the result of his betrayal, it was tied directly to the Heartstone. The curse he cast is bound to it, but the scroll mentioned a ritual to undo his magic. It must involve using the Heartstone in a way we haven't yet tried. She glanced at Adrian, her expression reflecting the gravity of their discovery. The ritual was their only hope of breaking the curse, but they still lacked the full understanding of what needed to be done. The murals provided clues, but they were fragmented and open to interpretation. "We need to decipher the exact steps of the ritual. Without it, we won't be able to sever the bond the sorcerer created with the reef." Adrian nodded, his mind already racing through the possibilities. "We know the Heartstone is central to everything. Its power is what binds the curse to the reef. But the scroll didn't provide enough details about the ritual itself. If we perform it wrong, we could make things worse." He paced around the chamber, his thoughts a whirlwind of uncertainty. They were so close to the truth, yet the path forward felt treacherous, like walking on a tightrope over an abyss. The stakes were higher than ever, and the weight of failure seemed to press down on him with each passing moment. He stopped, his gaze settling on Serena. "We can't afford to make a mistake. We need to figure out exactly what the ritual requires, every detail. The murals might hold the answers we need." Serena's eyes met his, and for a moment, there was a silent understanding between them. They were in this together, bound not just by the task before them, but by their shared determination to see it through. "Let's go over the scroll again," she said, her voice steady but tinged with the urgency of their situation. "We've missed something, I'm sure of it. There's a specific way the Heartstone must be used, and we need to find the missing pieces. If we can uncover the full ritual, we can break the curse and restore the reef." The resolve in her voice was unwavering, and Adrian felt a surge of hope. They had faced countless dangers already, but this, the breaking of the curse, was their true mission. With the murals in the scroll, they now had a chance to undo the sorcerer's betrayal and heal the damage done to the reef. Together, they would find a way to make it happen. As Adrian and Serena carefully pored over the scroll once more, a heavy silence settled between them. The ancient text, now familiar in its cryptic language, seemed to pulse with a sense of foreboding. Every word they deciphered revealed a new layer of complexity, and it became clear that the ritual they had to perform was unlike anything they had ever encountered. The scroll hinted at a delicate balance of magic, one that required the Heartstone to be in perfect alignment with the forces of nature that governed the reef. Serena's brow furrowed as she traced the words with her finger, her mind racing to make sense of the intricate instructions. The more she read, the more it became evident that they couldn't afford any mistakes. One wrong move, one misstep, and the curse might become even more potent, sealing the reef's fate forever. The murals on the chamber walls, which had once seemed like mere illustrations of history, now held critical clues. They depicted moments of celestial alignments, showing how the forces of magic and the Heartstone could be harnessed at specific times. The drawings were subtle but precise, patterns of light and shadow, specific phases of the moon, and certain tides that needed to be observed for the ritual to succeed. Adrian's eyes locked onto one particular mural, which showed an image of the heart stone surrounded by tendrils of dark magic. In the center, a figure stood, their arms raised toward the stone in a commanding pose, while lines of power snaked through the air in a carefully orchestrated flow. He could sense that the figure was performing the ritual, using the magic of the reef itself to counteract the curse. "We need to align ourselves with the reef's natural forces," Adrian murmured, his voice filled with awe and determination. "The timing has to be precise, or we risk everything." Serena nodded in agreement, her pulse quickening as she grasped the enormity of their task. The heart stone wasn't just a symbol of the curse, it was the key to breaking it. But to use its power effectively, they would need more than just the knowledge of the scroll. They would need to synchronize their own magic with the ebb and flow of the reef, drawing on the energy of the sea, the moon, and the land in ways they had never attempted before. The stakes were higher now. This wasn't just about defeating a dark sorcerer, it was about saving the entire reef, the very source of Serena's power and heritage. The ancient forces they were dealing with were vast and unpredictable, and the slightest error could undo everything they had worked toward. "We can't afford to fail," Serena said, her voice steady despite the weight of her realization. "We have to be in perfect harmony with everything around us." As the urgency of their situation set in, the pair became more focused on the task at hand. The time for studying and preparing was drawing to a close. Soon, they would have to act. Adrian's thoughts raced as he reviewed the scroll's contents once more. There were mentions of specific rituals, chants, movements, and symbols that had to be performed with impeccable timing. The heart stone was not a mere artifact. It was an entity in itself, one that required respect and careful handling. He could feel the weight of it on Serena's back, the stone pressing against her, its power both a gift and a danger. They had one shot, one chance to restore the heart of the reef. There could be no hesitation, no second guessing. "We need to be ready," Adrian said, his voice thick with resolve. "Every detail matters. We can't let our fear get in the way." Serena turned to him, her expression intense but calm. "We're ready. We've come this far, and now we understand what we're up against. The heartstone, the reef, the curse, it's all interconnected. We can do this." Her confidence resonated through Adrian like a steady pulse, reinforcing his own determination. They had faced countless trials together, and now, with all the pieces falling into place, they could see the way forward. The ritual would be difficult, but the bond they shared, one built on trust, courage, and unwavering support, was the anchor they needed. As the final steps of their quest loomed large before them, Adrian and Serena knew that their combined strength would guide them through the storm. The reef's future, and their own, rested in their hands. With the scroll carefully rolled and tucked away, Adrian and Serena stood at the threshold of the ancient chamber, the weight of their discovery pressing down on them like an invisible force. The air around them felt thicker, as if the very walls of the chamber were holding their breath in anticipation. What they had uncovered, an ancient betrayal that had corrupted the heart of the reef, was both a revelation and a burden. The knowledge had unlocked the path forward, but it also laid bare the enormity of the task ahead. They had the power to undo the curse, but only if they performed the ritual correctly, aligning themselves with the ancient forces that still pulsed within the reef. The path before them was clear, but it was fraught with danger, and they could not afford to falter. As they stepped out of the chamber and into the dim light of the underwater passage, the quiet hum of the reef filled their ears. It was the same sound they had heard countless times before, yet it now carried a different meaning. The reef, once a source of serenity and life, had become a battleground between light and shadow. The curse had marred its beauty, and only by undoing the dark magic could they restore it to its former glory. Serena's gaze swept over the water, her eyes lingering on the distant, shadowed outline of the heartstone, its power still radiating from the depths. The weight of her role as the guardian of the reef had never felt so heavy, but she knew she could not back down. She had come too far, and the reef's salvation lay in their hands. Adrian walked beside her, his every step deliberate, as if anchoring them both to the reality of what they were about to face. The scroll had given them the knowledge they needed, But the ritual's success hinged on timing and the mastery of forces they were still learning to understand. There would be no room for error. His thoughts raced, but he kept his focus, unwilling to allow fear to overtake him now. The bond they had forged during their journey, through every trial, every challenge, was stronger than ever. He reached out and touched Serena's arm lightly, a silent promise that they would face whatever lay ahead together. It was this unwavering partnership that would see them through. "We'll do this," he murmured, his voice steady. "We have no other choice." The deeper they ventured into the reef, the more the water seemed to change, as if the very current was aware of their intentions. The once calm waters now carried a sense of foreboding, the pressure building as the moment of the ritual drew near. Serena's heart beat faster with each passing minute. The Heartstone, the focal point of the curse and the key to its undoing, was closer now. Every instinct told her that they were on the cusp of something monumental. But with that knowledge came the realization that the ritual would test every ounce of their strength. They couldn't predict the consequences if they failed, only that the reef would remain in its corrupted state, its power forever locked in the grip of the curse. When they finally reached the Heartstone, its dark surface gleamed in the murky light, pulsing with the energy of the curse that had plagued the reef for so long. Serena could feel the stone's pull, a magnetic force that seemed to draw her in. Her hands trembled as she reached for it, the weight of the moment pressing down on her shoulders. She knew that once they began the ritual, there would be no turning back. The stakes were higher than they had ever been, but the path forward was now clear. They had uncovered the truth, they had prepared, and now it was time to restore the heart of the reef, and with it, the balance that had been shattered so long ago. Serena and Adrian exchanged one last look, a silent promise passing between them, before they stepped into the unknown. As Adrian and Serena ascended through the water, the pressure of their discovery weighed heavily upon them. The silent expanse of the reef stretched out beneath them, its once vibrant colors now muted under the dark shadow of the curse. Their breaths came in steady, synchronized motions, each knowing the enormity of what they had just uncovered. The heart of the reef, the source of the corruption, had become not only a symbol of Serena's personal burden, but a focal point for the entire ecosystem's suffering. The curse that had been a quiet, lingering force for so long now felt like an imminent threat, one that could unravel the delicate balance of life beneath the waves if left unchecked. Every step they took upward seemed to carry the weight of the reef's future, and with it, the responsibility to restore it. Their time spent together in the depths had forged a bond between them that was stronger than either of them had anticipated. What had started as a partnership driven by necessity had evolved into something deeper, a shared understanding and commitment to each other's cause. The quest had not only challenged their physical endurance, but had also forced them to confront their personal fears and doubts. As they emerged from the water and into the cool night air, the transition from the submerged world to the familiar land above felt jarring. The air was thick with the scent of salt and earth, yet the sense of urgency that had gripped them underwater followed them, a constant reminder that they could not afford to delay. Yet, despite their closeness, the revelation of the curse's true nature had left them both reeling. Serena, who had carried the weight of her mother's legacy for so long, now understood that her struggle was not only about her own redemption, it was about saving the reef itself. The curse had been set in motion long before her birth, and the imbalance that had followed was not merely a personal curse but one that had affected every creature, every plant, and every current within the reef. It was a tragic cycle that had gone on for too long, but now they had the power to change it. Serena's resolve hardened as she thought of all those who had been harmed by the sorcerer's treachery, and the depth of her mission became even clearer. Adrian, walking beside her, couldn't help but feel the weight of the world pressing down on his shoulders. The heart of the reef had always seemed like a distant myth, a place of power and mystery that was tied to Serena's lineage. But now, with the knowledge they had uncovered, it was no longer an abstract concept. It was the core of their struggle, the center of a curse that threatened everything. He had always known that their journey was dangerous, but now, with the truth laid bare, the stakes were far higher. The balance of life itself depended on their ability to restore the heart. There was no turning back from this responsibility, and Adrian couldn't shake the feeling that every decision from here on out would determine not just their fates, As they neared their camp, the faint glow of their lanterns flickering in the distance, both Serena and Adrian realized that they stood at the crossroads of destiny. What lay ahead was not just a battle against an ancient curse, but a fight to restore a fragile ecosystem that had been on the brink of collapse for generations. The weight of the responsibility was enormous, but so was the hope that had begun to bloom in their hearts. The bond they had forged, the knowledge they had uncovered, and the strength of their shared commitment gave them a sense of purpose they had never known before. Together, they would confront the final challenge, knowing that their actions would echo through the reef for generations to come. As Adrian and Serena broke the surface of the water, the first rays of dawn touched the world, painting the sky in shades of soft gold and pink. The water around them sparkled as the light filtered through, casting a serene glow on the reef that had once been vibrant, but now seemed caught in a perpetual shadow. The vastness of the ocean stretched before them, and for a moment, all was still. An eerie silence hung in the air, as if the entire reef was waiting for something, holding its breath in anticipation. The weight of their discovery, the knowledge that they had uncovered the true source of the curse, settled heavily upon their shoulders. The journey to this point had been arduous, fraught with danger and uncertainty, but now they stood on the precipice of the final stage of their quest. Serena gazed out at the horizon, her thoughts swirling as the gentle waves lapped at the shore. The path ahead was clear, yet the magnitude of the task they faced seemed almost insurmountable. The heart of the reef, once a powerful source of life and balance, had been corrupted by the sorcerer's betrayal, and only by confronting this dark magic could they hope to restore it. The power of the curse still lingered beneath the surface, an insidious force that threatened not just Serena, but the entire ecosystem. She felt the weight of her responsibility, knowing that the fate of the reef and all who depended on it rested on their shoulders. Yet, despite the enormity of the challenge, she felt a quiet resolve growing within her. This was her moment to face the legacy of her mother, to break the cycle of suffering, and to restore what had been lost. Beside her, Adrian stood firm, his gaze unwavering as he took in the vast expanse before them. The sun's first light cast long shadows, illuminating the ocean with a strange, ethereal glow. He could feel the tension in the air, the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The ritual they had uncovered in the ancient scroll required precision and timing, and they could not afford any mistakes. The Heartstone, now safely in Serena's possession, would be their guide, but only if they could unlock the full potential of its power. Adrian's thoughts turned to the sorcerer, the one who had set this curse in motion with his greed and ambition. His betrayal had left scars not just on Serena's lineage, but on the entire reef, and Adrian knew that it was up to them to right this wrong. They had come too far to turn back now. The bond between Adrian and Serena had deepened throughout their journey, forged through shared trials and a mutual understanding of the stakes they faced. In these final moments, as the sun rose higher, casting a warm golden light over the water, their unity was their strength. There was no room for fear, no room for doubt. They had learned to rely on one another, to trust in each other's abilities and strengths. Serena had carried the burden of the curse for so long, but now, she was no longer alone. Adrian had stood by her side through every challenge, offering support and guidance. Together, they had become a force greater than the sum of their parts, and it was this bond that would carry them through the final, most difficult stage of their quest. With a final, resolute glance at the horizon, Adrian turned to Serena. "We're ready," he said, his voice steady despite the uncertainty that still lingered in the air. Serena nodded, her heart pounding in her chest, but a sense of calm washed over her as she met his gaze. There was no turning back now. The heart of the reef awaited, and they would face the sorcerer's curse together, with everything they had. The final battle was about to begin, and no matter what lay ahead, they knew they could face it as long as they stood side by side. With the first light of dawn casting a warm glow over the reef, Adrian and Serena stood at the threshold of the final stage of their journey. The weight of their discovery, the knowledge of the sorcerer's betrayal and the curse that had plagued the heart of the reef for so long, settled deeply within them. Their bond, strengthened through trials and revelations, gave them the courage to step forward, even as the path ahead remained shrouded in uncertainty. The dangers they had faced up until now were nothing compared to what awaited them. Yet, despite the fear and doubt that threatened to creep in, they were resolute. They knew that this was their moment, the culmination of all they had fought for. Together, they would confront the curse and seek the restoration of balance to the reef. As they moved forward, the once familiar landscape of the reef felt different, almost ominous. The vibrant coral gardens and crystal-clear waters were now overshadowed by the knowledge of the corruption that lay beneath. The hard stone, still safely in Serena's possession, pulsed faintly with power, reminding them of the task that lay ahead. They could feel the presence of the curse, an invisible weight pressing down on the reef, and the sense of urgency in the air was palpable. The ritual they had uncovered required precision, the alignment of forces that could either restore the heart or bind it forever in shadow. There was no room for error. The path they were on would either bring salvation or doom, and it was up to them to make it right. Adrian's mind raced as he scanned the landscape, every shadow and ripple in the water seeming to hold hidden dangers. The sorcerer's influence was still alive in the depths, and the closer they got to the heart of the reef, the stronger the pull of dark magic became. The sense of foreboding grew with each step, but so did their resolve. They had learned, through their shared experiences, how to face uncertainty together. Serena's quiet strength and his unwavering commitment to her gave them both the courage to move forward. They had already faced so much and come so far. There was no turning back now. They had seen what the curse had done to the reef and the merfolk, and now they had the power to undo it. But that power came with a cost, and it was a risk they both understood. For Serena, the burden of her mother's legacy weighed heavily on her heart. The journey had not only been about breaking the curse but also about confronting the fears that had haunted her for so long. Her mother's death, the betrayal, and the responsibility of the Heartstone had shaped her life in ways she had never fully understood until now. But with Adrian by her side, she felt a glimmer of hope. They had uncovered the truth, and they had the knowledge to set things right. There was a chance, a real chance, to restore the reef to its former glory. And for the first time in a long while, Serena allowed herself to believe that it was possible. As they ventured deeper into the reef, the realization of how far they had come was not lost on them. Every challenge they had faced, every battle, every hardship, had led them to this moment. Their determination, trust, and love had been the guiding forces, and now they stood at the precipice of their greatest test. There was no more time to waste. With a final glance at each other, Adrian and Serena exchanged a look of quiet understanding. They were ready. Together, they would face whatever the heart of the reef had in store. They would confront the sorcerer's dark magic, unravel the curse, and restore balance to the world they had fought so hard to protect. Nothing could stand in their way now. Chapter 30. The Dark Ritual. The early morning sun cast a gentle, golden glow over the reef, its rays filtering through the clear water and illuminating the vibrant coral beneath. Adrian and Serena sat side by side on a large rock, the ancient scroll laid open between them, its worn pages now revealing crucial information that would shape the course of their quest. The revelation about the origin of the curse had been both a moment of clarity and a heavy burden. It had provided them with the missing piece of the puzzle, the betrayal by a trusted sorcerer that had tainted the heart of the reef. But it also brought to light a new, daunting challenge. The curse was not just the product of dark magic. It was a curse that could only be undone by an intricate and perilous ritual. As they carefully reviewed the scroll's description of the ritual, their minds swirled with the weight of what they had learned. The ritual was complex, requiring precise alignment of magical forces and the Heartstone, which Serena now carried. It was not a simple task. It demanded timing, knowledge, and a profound understanding of the magic that bound the reef. Serena's fingers traced the ancient text, the urgency of their mission settling in her chest. The sorcerer's betrayal had been deliberate, and now it was up to them to reverse it, to restore the heart of the reef before the dark magic could claim any more lives. The pressure was mounting, but they both understood that the fate of the reef rested on their ability to perform this ritual correctly. Adrian, sensing Serena's rising anxiety, reached over and placed a reassuring hand on hers. The path ahead would be treacherous, and they both knew that they couldn't afford to make mistakes. But there was a quiet strength in their bond, an unspoken agreement that they would face this challenge together, no matter what it took. They had uncovered the truth, and now they had to act. With the first light of day casting long shadows across the reef, they felt the gravity of their responsibility. The curse had lingered for far too long, and it was up to them to bring the balance back to the reef. They had come this far, and despite the uncertainties that lay ahead, they were more determined than ever to succeed. Adrian and Serena moved with focused determination as they gathered their supplies, the gravity of their mission settling into their bones. They packed the essentials for their journey: water, food, and tools for protection, along with the heart stone that would play a crucial role in the ritual. The scroll, now carefully rolled and tucked into Serena's satchel, contained the specific details they would need for the ceremony. Yet, as they prepared, a sense of unease lingered in the air, a quiet reminder that their quest was far from simple. The scroll's warnings weighed heavily on them. There were conditions for the ritual's success, and failure to meet them would bring even darker consequences. As they made their way toward the water's edge, the scroll's details about the ritual's location echoed in Serena's mind. The ritual had to be performed at a place hidden deep within the reef, a sacred site where the heart of the reef's power once thrived. But getting there wouldn't be easy. The scroll had spoken of treacherous waters, raging currents, shifting tides, and dangerous creatures that guarded the path. These weren't just physical obstacles. The very waters themselves were infused with dark magic, remnants of the sorcerer's betrayal that had cursed the reef. The closer they drew to the heart of the reef, the more they would have to rely on their wits and skills to navigate the perilous path that lay ahead. Adrian, his expression resolute, offered Serena a steadying smile as he adjusted the straps of his pack. "We've faced danger before," he said, his voice low but confident. "We can do this." Serena nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon, her mind racing with the weight of their task. The waters they would soon enter were no longer just the natural realm of the reef. They were a battleground, a place where the magic of the sorcerer had twisted reality itself. But together, they had overcome the odds before. The bond they shared, strengthened by trust and shared purpose, would carry them through the coming trials. They had no choice but to press on, knowing that the fate of the reef, and perhaps even their own, depended on their success. With one last glance at the safe shores behind them, they stepped into the unknown, ready for the perilous journey that awaited. Serena's words hung in the air, heavy with the weight of their next steps. Her gaze lingered on the distant horizon, where the waters shimmered with a quiet, deceptive calm. "The abyssal chasm," she repeated, almost as if the words themselves carried a warning. It was a place of legend, whispered about among the oldest merfolk, a deep, uncharted part of the ocean known for its perilous currents and the strange, dark creatures that called it home. According to the scroll, this was where the ritual had to be performed, at the very core of the reef's magic. But the scroll had also made clear that getting to the chasm was no easy feat. It was a place where even the bravest of explorers often failed to return from, consumed by the overwhelming force of the chasm's depths. Adrian glanced at Serena, seeing the resolve in her eyes, but also the underlying fear that this final journey would test them in ways they hadn't yet imagined. He knew the stories too well, how the chasm's waters were alive with the sorcerer's lingering curse, a twisted magic that made the sea itself a deadly adversary. He could feel the pressure of the unknown pressing down on them, but he also knew that they had no choice but to move forward. If the curse was to be broken, the heart of the reef had to be restored, and that meant reaching the abyssal chasm, no matter the dangers. "We'll need to be careful," Adrian said, his voice firm but understanding. "The chasm is dangerous, but we've faced impossible odds before. Together, we'll find a way." Serena nodded, the faintest tremor in her hands betraying the unease that lingered beneath her composed exterior. She appreciated his confidence, but the truth was undeniable. This was the final step, and failure was not an option. With the scroll guiding them, and the bond they shared strengthening their resolve, they set their sights on the abyssal chasm, knowing that whatever lay ahead, they would face it as one. Adrian's eyes narrowed as he surveyed the vast expanse of water before them, the weight of their decision settling heavily on his shoulders. He knew the abyssal chasm was no ordinary place. It wasn't just the perilous currents, or the deadly creatures lurking in the deep that made it so feared. It was the dark magic that twisted the very fabric of the sea, poisoning everything that entered its depths. The stories of sailors who had disappeared without a trace, the merfolk who dared not venture near, were enough to make anyone hesitate. But Serena was right. The heart of the reef could only be saved if they completed the ritual in its heart, and that meant confronting the chasm's dangers head-on. Serena met his gaze, her expression hardening with determination. The risks were impossible to ignore, but she knew they were the only ones who could do this. The curse that had haunted her family, that had warped the very essence of the reef, would not be undone by hesitation or fear. With the scroll in hand and Adrian by her side, she felt the steady pulse of their shared purpose, a beacon guiding them through the uncertainty. The abyssal chasm was a place of legend, but it was also the place where the final battle for the reef's salvation would be fought. Adrian gave a slow, steady nod. "We'll need to prepare ourselves for everything, physical and magical." He pulled his pack tighter over his shoulders, his mind already racing with strategies and contingencies. "The chasm won't let us simply walk in and perform the ritual. We'll have to face whatever the curse throws at us." He could feel the weight of the responsibility, not just for the reef, but for Serena too. They had come so far, and they couldn't afford to fail now. Despite the danger that loomed, there was no turning back. With a final glance at the horizon, he spoke again, quieter this time. "We'll face it together." Serena's eyes softened, her resolve unwavering as she nodded in agreement. They were ready for what lay ahead. The further they ventured into the heart of the reef, the more the underwater landscape transformed. The vibrant hues of coral gardens gave way to eerie, shadowed caverns where the light struggled to penetrate. Schools of shimmering fish darted past, oblivious to the weight of the quest that hung over Adrian and Serena like a thick fog. Despite the surreal beauty surrounding them, the gravity of their mission pressed on their minds. Each step brought them closer to the abyssal chasm, a place where the delicate balance of life in the reef had been upended by dark forces. The once thriving ecosystem now carried the faintest echo of the curse that had twisted it, leaving an unsettling stillness in its wake. Serena moved ahead with confidence, her eyes scanning the intricate paths that wove through the coral structures. Her heart pounded in her chest, the weight of her heritage and the looming ritual pressing down on her. She knew that beyond the serene beauty of the reef lay the dangers they'd been warned about: treacherous currents, hidden predators, and the ever-present sense that something far darker lurked in the depths. Adrian stayed close, his steady presence a reminder that they were in this together. He watched the waters with sharp vigilance, ready to act should anything unexpected arise. Despite the outward calm, his mind raced, calculating the risks they faced and the potential perils that awaited them deeper in the reef. As they continued, the environment seemed to shift, becoming more oppressive and foreboding. The soft murmur of the ocean faded, replaced by an eerie silence that felt like an ominous warning. The once vibrant colors of the reef grew muted, the sea life sparse and weary. The further they ventured into the labyrinthine corridors, the closer they came to the heart of the curse, and the more tangible the sense of danger became. Each moment, each movement, carried the knowledge that they were approaching a place where the laws of the natural world had been distorted by ancient magic. The beauty of the reef seemed almost mocking now, as if reminding them of the untold loss that had been inflicted upon this underwater world. But Serena and Adrian pushed forward, undeterred by the heavy sense of foreboding. They had a mission, and they would not falter. As they drew nearer to the outer edges of the abyssal chasm, the atmosphere of the reef changed drastically. The once bright waters grew darker, as if the very essence of light had been consumed by the depths. The vibrant sea life that had surrounded them for so long vanished, replaced by eerie quiet and the occasional flicker of movement in the shadows. The ocean around them felt alive in a way that was unsettling, its currents swirling with an unnatural force, twisting and pulling at their limbs as if the very water sought to prevent their passage. Every stroke of their fins seemed to be met with resistance, the powerful undercurrents threatening to drag them off course. The weight of the ocean's oppressive silence made their presence feel even more intrusive in this forsaken part of the reef. Serena, undeterred by the mounting pressure and the disorienting currents, moved forward with purpose. Her deep knowledge of the reef, its hidden paths, and its dangers became their lifeline as they pressed on. She navigated the churning waters with a practiced grace, each movement deliberate as she countered the currents and guided Adrian through the shifting tides. Her connection to the reef, forged over years of living in its embrace, allowed her to sense subtle cues in the water, the current's strength, the hidden threats lurking in the shadows, and adapt quickly. Adrian followed closely behind, trusting her expertise, though the strain of the journey was beginning to take its toll. The turbulent waters made it difficult to maintain a steady pace, and every so often, he would lose his footing, only to be caught by Serena's steady hand or a carefully executed pull. The deeper they ventured, the more alien the environment seemed. The weight of the water pressed against them as the dark chasm opened up before them, its vastness intimidating and foreboding. The further they moved into its depths, the more the reef felt like a place that had been abandoned by time itself. There was no sign of life here, only the oppressive force of the currents and the unyielding darkness that surrounded them. Despite the challenge of moving through these treacherous waters, Serena and Adrian were undeterred. They knew that the heart of the reef, and the final piece of their quest, awaited at the chasm's core. But as they ventured deeper into the abyssal chasm, the oppressive silence and the violent currents seemed to signal that the true dangers of this place had only just begun to reveal themselves. Serena's voice broke through the oppressive silence, steady yet laced with a sense of urgency. She pointed towards a jagged rocky outcrop jutting from the sea floor, barely visible in the dim light. The rocky ledge seemed like their last point of stable ground before the overwhelming force of the abyssal chasm claimed them entirely. The water around it churned violently, swirling in every direction as if the currents themselves were determined to keep them from venturing deeper into the heart of the chasm. The shadows of the reef seemed to grow darker, as if warning them of the dangers that lay ahead. Serena's brow furrowed as she gauged the distance between their current position and the heart of the chasm. It was clear that they were entering a dangerous part of the reef, but they had no choice. Adrian nodded, his face tense with determination. He could feel the pull of the currents even here, at the outer edges of the chasm, and the thought of swimming into the heart of it made his pulse quicken. Yet the need to break the curse and restore balance to the reef outweighed his fear. He glanced at Serena, his trust in her unwavering as she led them through this perilous journey. With a deep breath, he pushed aside the doubt creeping into his mind and prepared for what was to come. The next stretch of their journey would test them both in ways they had not yet experienced. As Serena motioned to the rock, he swam closer to her, the turbulent waters making each movement feel like a battle against an invisible force. The rocky outcrop offered little comfort as they anchored themselves, and the realization of the distance they still had to cover weighed heavily on both of them. The waves surged around them, crashing into the rocks with a thunderous roar, sending splashes of seawater into the air. Serena checked their gear one last time, ensuring that the heartstone was secure in her satchel and that they were both ready for the next phase of their journey. She took one final glance at Adrian, offering him a tight but resolute smile, though her eyes betrayed the unease she felt. The ritual could only be performed in the very center of the chasm, where the waters would be most volatile, and time was running out. Without another word, they both turned towards the dark, foreboding waters that lay ahead. Serena took the lead, her movements graceful and deliberate as she swam into the current. The water grew colder the deeper they descended, the pull of the abyss stronger with every passing moment. Adrian followed closely behind, his muscles burning with effort as the currents tried to pull him off course. The chasm's vastness was disorienting, and for a moment, he felt as though they were swimming through nothingness, swallowed by the very depth of the ocean itself. But Serena's steady presence, her guiding hand in the water, kept him grounded. Together, they pressed forward into the heart of the abyssal chasm, ready to face whatever trials awaited them at its core. Adrian's eyes narrowed as he studied the darkness ahead, the swirling abyss that seemed to stretch endlessly before them. The chasm felt like a living, breathing entity, its currents twisting and pulling with an almost malicious intent. The deeper they swam, the more the water seemed to close in around them, a suffocating weight pressing down from all sides. Yet despite the overwhelming force of the ocean's depths, Adrian's resolve remained unshaken. He had come this far with Serena, through dangers and trials, and he knew they couldn't afford to turn back now. The heart stone pulsed gently in his bag, its presence a reminder of the crucial task that lay ahead, the breaking of the curse and the restoration of the reef's delicate balance. Serena moved ahead of him, her strokes confident and steady despite the harsh conditions. She had always been the guide in these waters, her deep understanding of the reef and its secrets keeping them on course. Adrian followed closely, trusting in her expertise and the bond they shared. He could see the flicker of doubt in her eyes occasionally, but her determination was unmistakable. He knew the stakes were high, and the journey would only get more perilous as they ventured deeper into the heart of the chasm. The dangers of the waters and the dark forces that lingered there were not the only threats they faced. The emotional weight of their mission pressed heavily on both of them. But Adrian understood now that they were not just fighting for the reef, but for each other, for the future they hoped to build, free from the curse that had shaped Serena's life for so long. With each passing moment, the water grew colder and more oppressive. The currents intensified, tugging at their limbs, making every stroke feel like a battle. Adrian's muscles burned with exertion as they fought against the current's pull, but he never lost sight of their goal. Serena was the beacon, guiding them with unwavering determination, and he was by her side every step of the way. "We can't turn back now," he thought to himself, his voice steady despite the strain. "Not when we're this close." The chasm loomed before them, its depths swallowing all light, but together they would navigate through it. And when they reached the heart of the chasm, they would face whatever waited there, knowing that they had come too far to fail. They paused for a moment, the weight of the task ahead settling heavily between them. Adrian adjusted his gear, ensuring his breathing apparatus and the small satchel containing the heartstone were securely fastened. The stone's faint glow cast a soft light on the surrounding water, a stark contrast to the darkness of the abyss that awaited them. Serena checked her own equipment with methodical precision, her hands steady despite the mounting tension. Every detail had to be perfect. They had no room for error. The heartstone was their only chance at breaking the curse, and the ritual they would soon perform depended on it being in the right place at the right time. Serena's eyes, though focused, betrayed a flicker of doubt as she glanced at Adrian. The swirling currents of the abyssal chasm looked far more dangerous up close, a swirling mass of darkness that seemed to move with a life of its own. Yet, despite the ominous waters before them, she felt a quiet sense of calm. She had lived her entire life under the shadow of the curse, and now, with Adrian at her side, she felt something that had been absent for so long, a glimmer of hope. She met his gaze, offering him a small but determined nod. There was no turning back now. The task ahead was monumental, but she had faced impossible odds before. This time, she wouldn't face them alone. Taking one final, steadying breath, Serena pushed her apprehensions aside. The moment of hesitation passed, and she motioned toward the chasm's heart. "We've come this far. Let's finish this," she said, her voice steady. Adrian nodded in agreement, his expression mirroring the determination that filled her. The chasm's treacherous waters were now a challenge they would face together. They took their first synchronized stroke, cutting through the water as they plunged into the heart of the abyss. Their shared resolve, bolstered by their trust in one another, was the anchor they needed to navigate the dangers ahead. With every pull, they swam closer to the heart of the chasm, and to the final confrontation with the curse that had bound Serena's life for so long. As they descended further into the chasm, the once steady currents turned into powerful torrents, swirling around them with an unyielding force. Serena's practiced movements were a stark contrast to the chaos around her. Each stroke she made was calculated and precise, her body attuned to the rhythm of the water. She guided Adrian through the violent currents, her focus unwavering despite the overwhelming pressure. The chasm, once beautiful in its quiet depths, now felt like a living, breathing entity, its currents alive with the power to drag them under at any moment. The force of the water was relentless, and every move they made seemed to provoke the currents more, pushing them further from their intended path. Adrian, despite his determination, could feel the strain in his muscles, his breaths shallow and labored. The water pressed against him, each movement against the current sapping more of his energy. His arms burned with exertion, and his mind raced to keep up with Serena's pace. He tried to match her rhythm, but the currents fought against him, pulling at his limbs like invisible hands trying to tear him away from the path. The heart of the chasm seemed to move farther away with each stroke, and he struggled not to lose focus, to stay grounded in their mission. The stakes felt higher now, the crushing weight of the water reminding him of the immense danger they were in. Despite the exhaustion and the growing desperation, Adrian could feel Serena's unwavering presence beside him, her quiet strength guiding him through the chaos. She had led them this far, and he wasn't about to falter now. His resolve hardened with each struggle, the fear of failure, and the weight of their mission pushing him forward. They had come too far to turn back, and despite the dangers, they had no choice but to push through. With every pull of his arms, Adrian drew closer to the heart of the chasm, trusting Serena to lead them both to the final confrontation with the curse. The currents could rage, the waters could batter them, but together, they would endure. Serena's voice cut through the deafening roar of the currents, urgent and commanding, but there was a hint of strain in her words as she fought to be heard. The water seemed to grow angrier as they pressed on, waves crashing around them like the very sea itself was determined to keep them from reaching their goal. The distance to the center of the chasm felt endless, with the currents pulling them in every direction, threatening to tear them apart. Yet, Serena's determination never wavered. She had led them this far, and there was no turning back now. She gripped Adrian's arm, her hand firm despite the chaos, as they fought to maintain their course, inching ever closer to their destination. Adrian's chest heaved with each breath, the weight of the water pressing against him, but Serena's words sparked something in him. Despite the pounding in his head and the tightness in his limbs, he pushed on, forcing his body to move through the relentless current. The center of the chasm, the site of the ritual, was within reach, and the knowledge that their mission depended on them reaching it fueled his resolve. Every muscle screamed, every movement felt like a battle, but he wouldn't give in. Not now, not after everything they had been through. He caught a glimpse of Serena ahead, her figure a beacon in the chaos, and followed her lead with renewed determination. The chasm seemed to close in around them as they pushed forward, the water darker and colder the deeper they went. Serena's eyes were locked on a point in the distance. He could see the resolve in her expression, the fire in her gaze that had never wavered even when the odds seemed impossible. The heartstone, secure at her side, pulsed with a quiet energy, as if aware of the task that lay ahead. Adrian forced his focus back to the journey, blocking out the screaming winds of the chasm and the biting currents. The center of the chasm was just ahead, and the moment for the ritual was nearly upon them. There was no time to hesitate. With one final surge of effort, they pushed forward, the heart of the chasm within their grasp. The deeper they ventured into the abyssal chasm, the more oppressive the darkness became, swallowing the light around them. It felt as if the very walls of the chasm were pressing in on them, the weight of the water and the thick silence of the deep making each breath feel like a battle. The currents, now an almost tangible force, wrapped around them, trying to pull them apart. But Serena's grip on the heartstone and Adrian's unwavering determination kept them anchored in their mission. Each stroke forward felt like a victory against the darkness that seemed to stretch on forever. But the faint glow from the heartstone was a constant reminder of their purpose, a flicker of light in an ocean of shadows. Adrian's muscles screamed in protest with each movement, but the faint pulse of the heartstone spurred him on. The glow it emitted, soft yet persistent, seemed to guide their path through the chasm's twisting currents. It was as though the stone was not just a beacon, but a force of nature itself, tethering them to their goal. He stole a glance at Serena, her face set in grim concentration as she navigated them through the perilous waters. There was a quiet strength in her, a steady resolve that he admired, and it gave him the courage to push through his own exhaustion. They had come too far, and the heartstone's glow reminded them that they were not alone in this struggle. As they neared the heart of the chasm, the pressure in the water seemed to intensify, but so did the radiance of the heartstone. The ethereal light grew brighter, more vibrant, casting strange and shifting shadows against the chasm's walls. It was as if the stone itself was awakening to the task at hand, its glow growing stronger the closer they got to the center. Serena's grip tightened on the stone, her resolve solidifying with each passing moment. Adrian, feeling the weight of their journey, matched her pace, the light now almost blinding as they reached the final stretch. They were close, so close, that the very essence of the chasm seemed to pulse in time with the heartstone, as if it too recognized that their time had come. After what felt like an eternity, Adrian and Serena finally emerged from the relentless currents, their bodies fatigued, but their spirits steadfast. The oppressive darkness of the chasm began to recede, replaced by a strange stillness. The water, once turbulent and chaotic, had become eerily calm, as if the very heart of the chasm was awaiting their arrival. The moment they crossed the threshold into this quiet space, the change was immediate. The surrounding waters shimmered with a soft, otherworldly light, casting an ethereal glow that seemed to pulse with ancient magic. It was a stark contrast to the violent forces they had just navigated, and for a brief moment, it almost felt as though time itself had paused. The heartstone, still clasped securely in Serena's hand, began to resonate with the light surrounding them. Its glow intensified, brighter than ever before, as if it were attuned to the very energies of the chasm. Adrian could feel the magic thrumming in the water, a vibration that reached deep into his bones. The stone's power was unmistakable now. It wasn't just a source of light, but a key that could unlock the magic woven into the reef itself. As they hovered in the stillness, the once muted glow of the stone seemed to grow in strength, synchronizing with the pulsing light at the center of the chasm. It was as though the two energies were calling to one another, the stone and the chasm's heart, drawn together by an ancient, unspoken connection. Serena's breath quickened as she felt the magic in the air. The calmness of the waters around them felt alive, as though the chasm itself was waiting for them to make the next move. The tension was palpable, the gravity of their task pressing down on them as they hovered at the center. They had reached the heart of the curse. This was the place where it had all begun, and where it could finally be undone. The faint glow of the heartstone was no longer just illumination. It was a beacon, a force that would guide them in performing the ritual. Serena exchanged a brief glance with Adrian, a silent understanding passing between them. They had arrived. Now, all that remained was to perform the ritual that would restore balance and break the curse that had haunted the reef for so long. Serena's voice echoed softly in the still waters, her words laced with the weight of their journey. This was the moment they had fought for, the place where everything would come to a head. As she spoke, she looked around, scanning the area with a sense of both reverence and trepidation. The strange, pulsating light from the center of the chasm surrounded them, casting surreal shadows on the walls. Serena could feel the magic in the air, thick and heavy, as though the waters themselves were holding their breath in anticipation. They had reached the heart of the curse, and now they stood on the edge of what could be their salvation, or their undoing. Adrian glanced at Serena, his expression serious as he took in the scene before them. The chasm's center was a place of unimaginable power, but it also held an unnerving stillness. The silence was almost suffocating, broken only by the distant hum of energy vibrating through the water. The ritual they were about to perform would require precision, each step a delicate dance with the forces that governed the reef. Adrian tightened his grip on the heartstone, feeling its energy thrumming beneath his fingers. He could sense its connection to the chasm, and though he knew they were on the precipice of something immense, a part of him was filled with dread. The power they were about to unleash was beyond their full understanding, but it was their only chance. Serena took a deep breath and moved closer to the center of the chasm, her eyes locked on the glowing epicenter. She could feel the weight of her mother's legacy pressing down on her, the knowledge of the curse, and the fear of what might happen if they failed. She began to carefully arrange the items they had gathered for the ritual, the heartstone, the ancient scroll, and a few other key components described in the texts. Each item had a specific role, and the timing had to be perfect. As she worked, she glanced at Adrian, their shared determination giving her strength. This was the moment that would determine everything. She had to trust in the knowledge they had gained, in the bond they shared, and in the power of the heartstone to break the curse that had plagued the reef for so long. With steady hands, Serena and Adrian worked together, following following the precise instructions from the scroll. Every movement was deliberate, each step crucial to the success of the ritual. The heart stone gleamed softly in their hands before being carefully placed on the central pedestal, its smooth surface radiating warmth as it settled into place. As it touched the stone, the entire chasm seemed to respond. The light from the heart stone intensified, its glow pulsing with increasing strength, as though it were drawing power from the very heart of the chasm itself. The surrounding waters shimmered with a soft, ethereal light, a sign that the magic was beginning to align, and that their efforts were not in vain. Serena stood back, her breath shallow as she watched the heart stone absorb the surrounding energies. The tension in the water was palpable, and she could feel the magic swirling around them, ancient and untamed. She glanced at Adrian, whose eyes were fixed on the stone with a mixture of awe and anticipation. The air seemed charged with electricity, and every second felt like it was stretching into eternity. Despite the calm surface of the chasm, Serena knew the danger that lay in the heart of the ritual. The slightest misstep could undo everything. But they had come this far, and there was no turning back now. As the heart stone continued to pulse, Serena retrieved the scroll and began to recite the ancient incantation, her voice steady but reverberating with an undercurrent of urgency. The words she spoke seemed to reverberate through the water, the ancient language coming to life as the magical forces around them grew more intense. The chasm seemed to awaken, the very walls of the cavern vibrating in response to the ritual's call. Adrian moved closer, his presence a constant reassurance, as they both knew that the final step was nearing. The stone's glow had now reached its zenith, and all that remained was to channel the accumulated energy into the heart of the reef, into the source of the curse itself. Adrian's voice cut through the tense stillness of the chasm, his gaze unwavering as he looked at Serena. His eyes held a mixture of determination and apprehension, knowing the enormity of what was about to happen. The flickering light from the heart stone bathed his face in a soft, almost otherworldly glow, and for a moment, the chaotic currents of the outside world seemed distant. But in this moment, nothing mattered more than the task before them, the final act that would either break the curse or bind them to failure. Every fiber of his being was keyed up, waiting for the signal to act. His grip tightened around the heart stone, which pulsed steadily in his hands, as if in response to his growing anticipation. Serena met his gaze, her expression resolute despite the uncertainty swirling in her chest. The weight of their journey, the countless dangers they had faced, and the burden of restoring the reef pressed down on her. But it was also in these moments that her resolve was most steadfast. She could feel the power in the air, thick with magic, as the ancient energies of the chasm surrounded them. She could almost hear the whisper of the reef's past, the voices of the merfolk who had lived and died under the curse's shadow. Everything had led to this point, and now there was no turning back. She took a deep breath, steadying herself before she spoke. "We're ready," she said, her voice unwavering despite the immense pressure. The words felt like a vow, not just to Adrian but to the reef itself, to the memory of her mother, and to the legacy of those who had been lost. She could feel the weight of history bearing down on them, but she refused to let it overwhelm her. Together, they had uncovered the truth, and together, they would finish what had been started long ago. Their partnership had brought them this far, and with the heart stone in place, and the ritual about to begin, Serena knew there was no other option but to succeed. Serena's gaze never wavered as she spoke, her voice steady despite the gravity of the task ahead. Every word she uttered felt like a promise, not just to herself, but to the entire reef, to the legacy of her mother, and to the generations of merfolk who had suffered under the curse's grip. The ritual before them was more than just a set of instructions, it was the final piece of a puzzle that had haunted her family for years. As she looked at Adrian, she felt a deep sense of connection, knowing they were about to share this moment, this pivotal act that would decide their fate and the future of the reef. There was no room for doubt, no time for hesitation. They had come too far to falter now. The heart stone rested on its pedestal, its glow pulsing rhythmically, almost as if it were alive, attuned to the ancient magic that coursed through the chasm. The calm waters around them hummed with an energy that felt both ancient and timeless, the air heavy with the weight of the ritual's necessity. Serena could feel it deep within her bones, the resonance of the chasm's power, the echo of the curse that had tainted the very heart of the reef for so long. But she also felt a spark of hope, a glimmer of possibility that maybe, just maybe, they were on the brink of something far greater than they had dared to imagine. The darkness could be undone, the heart of the reef could be restored, and the curse could finally be lifted. With her resolve solidified, Serena turned her attention back to the ritual, mentally reviewing each step one last time. She knew the risks. Failure meant not only the continuation of the curse but the potential loss of everything they had fought for. The currents of magic surrounding them swirled and shifted as if the very chasm itself was waiting for them to act, to perform the ritual that would either seal the reef's fate or set it free. Serena took a steadying breath, her heart beating in sync with the rhythm of the Heartstone. "Let's begin," she said, the finality of her words hanging in the stillness, before they both stepped forward, ready to face whatever the chasm had in store. The first syllables of the incantation slipped from Serena's lips with a clarity that seemed to reverberate through the very air, her voice steady and precise despite the tension in the water around them. The words, ancient and unfamiliar, seemed to resonate with the chasm itself, as if the very walls of the abyss were waking up to the magic being invoked. Each phrase carried the weight of centuries, of untold stories, of betrayal and sorrow, but also of hope and redemption. As the incantation built, the Heartstone on its pedestal pulsed brighter, its light responding to the ancient magic woven into the chant. The currents that had once raged around them seemed to still, as if holding their breath, waiting for the outcome of this final act. The light from the Heartstone grew in intensity, casting long, luminous patterns that danced across the jagged walls of the chasm. Shadows twisted and flickered, merging with the glowing streaks of light, creating a surreal, dreamlike atmosphere. The surrounding water seemed to hum in response, vibrating with an energy that was almost tangible. Serena's heart raced as the incantation continued, each word building the layers of power necessary to undo the curse that had bound her for so long. Adrian stood beside her, his focus unwavering as he repeated the incantation, his voice a steady echo of hers. Together, their words wove a delicate web of magic that began to shift the very essence of the chasm, as if they were unraveling the curse's grip with each breath they took. The chasm's eerie silence was broken only by the sound of the ritual's words, and yet, as they continued, the Heartstone's glow grew so bright it became almost blinding. The patterns on the walls intensified, cascading across the rocky surfaces like liquid light. The once still waters began to ripple, the energy swirling faster as the forces of magic and nature collided in a final crescendo. Serena's pulse quickened as she felt the Heartstone's power aligning with the chasm's energy, the ancient magic being undone, piece by piece. There was no turning back now, the ritual was in motion, and with every passing moment, they drew closer to breaking the curse and restoring the heart of the reef to its rightful state. As the final words of the incantation echoed through the chasm, a powerful shift seemed to ripple through the very fabric of the waters around them. The darkness that had once clung to the heart of the reef began to unwind, like smoke dissipating in the wind. The Heartstone, now glowing with a fierce, steady light, pulsed in sync with the rhythm of the magic being undone. The oppressive pressure that had weighed heavily on Serena's heart for so long loosened, and she could feel the curse's hold weakening, piece by piece. The air, thick with centuries of sorrow and betrayal, seemed to lighten as the energy around them transformed. The chasm itself seemed to hum, a low, vibrating sound that felt like the reef itself was exhaling, releasing the centuries of pain that had bound it. The waters, once turbulent and chaotic, began to settle, the swirling currents softening and shifting into a gentle flow. What had been an abyss of shadows and dread now felt like a place of rebirth, the once tangled currents now calm and serene. The oppressive weight that had clung to the reef's heart was gone, and in its place was a sense of profound peace. Serena's breath came easier, the tightness in her chest that had plagued her for years lifting as if the water around her were somehow lighter. The chasm, which had been a tomb of suffering and darkness, now felt like a sanctuary, its energy no longer corrupted but infused with the healing magic they had invoked. As the ritual concluded, a profound silence fell over the chasm. The glow from the Heartstone softened to a warm, steady light, casting a golden hue over the waters. The once foreboding depths of the abyss now seemed peaceful. The darkness that had twisted and pervaded the reef now replaced with a subtle sense of renewal. Serena looked around, her eyes reflecting a mix of disbelief and wonder. The curse was gone, and in its place was the restored balance of the heart of the reef. The water felt pure, the currents gentle, and the once feeling of being trapped within the curse was replaced by a sense of freedom, as though the entire reef had been reborn. Together, they had not only broken the curse but had restored harmony to the very heart of the ocean. Serena and Adrian stood in the stillness that followed the final incantations, their bodies weary from the intense energy of the ritual. The Heartstone, once blazing with powerful light, now began to dim, its glow softening to a gentle pulse. The magic had been done, and they could feel the weight of their task lifting with each passing second. The air around them felt different, lighter, more expansive, as though the entire chasm had exhaled a long-held breath. They exchanged a glance, both of them too exhausted to speak at first, but the shared understanding in their eyes said everything. The curse had been broken, and the heart of the reef was no longer tainted by the darkness that had bound it for centuries. The chasm, once a place of turmoil and fear, now seemed peaceful, its currents no longer aggressive but calm and soothing. Serena's hands trembled slightly, not from the effort, but from the relief of knowing that their journey had come to an end. The Heartstone's pulse slowed, now merely a faint glow, signaling the completion of its mission. The ancient magic that had once corrupted the reef had been undone, and the balance had been restored. For the first time in so long, Serena felt a true sense of peace settle over her, as if the reef itself had finally found its harmony again. Adrian, standing beside her, shared the same quiet satisfaction. Though they were both exhausted, physically drained from the intensity of the ritual and emotionally spent from the weight of the curse, they felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. They had faced impossible odds, battled the currents of the abyssal chasm, and performed an ancient, life-altering ritual. And now, standing amidst the calm waters, they knew they had succeeded. The reef was healing, the curse had been lifted, and the Heartstone's task was complete. Their bond, forged through this harrowing journey, was stronger than ever, and together they had restored peace to the very heart of the ocean. Adrian's voice broke the silence, and his words seemed to reverberate through the calm waters around them. "We did it," he said, a sense of awe and disbelief threading through his voice. As he looked around, the once oppressive weight of the chasm had lifted, replaced by an almost tangible sense of relief. The air, which had felt thick with centuries of corruption, now felt clean, infused with a lightness that made the waters shimmer in ways that hadn't been possible before. The Heartstone's glow had faded, but the peace it had restored lingered, filling the very essence of the reef with renewal. They had succeeded where so many before them had failed, and for a brief moment, it felt as though the entire world had exhaled in unison with them. Serena stood still, her heart racing with the realization of what they had just accomplished. She had always known that the curse's hold on her was more than personal. It had tainted the very fabric of the reef. But now, as the darkness receded, there was a profound change, a healing that spread deeper than the surface. "It's really happening," she whispered, almost to herself, her voice barely audible over the gentle ripple of the waters. She could feel the difference in the water around her, in the currents that no longer fought against them, but rather flowed in harmony with their movements. It was as if the reef had recognized their victory, and in doing so, was welcoming them as stewards of its rebirth. Adrian stepped closer to Serena, his expression a mix of wonder and disbelief. For all their struggles, for all the sacrifices they had made to reach this moment, the truth was undeniable. They had done it. They had broken the curse. His hand brushed hers in a quiet gesture of solidarity, and for the first time since they had entered the chasm, the weight of their journey felt lighter. The waters that had once felt dangerous and unknown now held the promise of healing and growth. The heart of the reef was no longer a place of sorrow, but one of hope. Together, they had restored what had been lost, and the future of the reef, and of their bond, was finally clear. Serena's eyes sparkled with unshed tears, the weight of their journey finally lifting from her shoulders. As she looked around, the waters seemed to embrace her, their gentle currents now flowing with a sense of peace. Her chest tightened with relief as she took in the transformation around them. The once murky depths now clear, the oppressive energy that had clung to the reef fading into the background. The Heartstone, having fulfilled its purpose, no longer emitted the blinding intensity it once had, but its subtle, steady glow still lingered like a promise of what was to come. Serena felt the quiet but undeniable truth settle in her heart. They had succeeded. The curse was broken, and with it, the heart of the reef would once again flourish. As the reality of their success sank in, Serena's mind drifted to the memories of the pain and suffering that had plagued the reef for so long. The curse had been a shadow over her life, a constant reminder of the past betrayal that had shaped her destiny. But now, there was a tangible shift in the air, as though the very ocean itself had been given a second chance. Her lips curved into a small, grateful smile as she turned to Adrian, her heart swelling with gratitude. "We've done it," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "The heart of the reef will be restored." It was a victory not just for the reef, but for her, for Adrian, and for everything they had fought for. The bond they had formed through this shared struggle was irreplaceable, and Serena knew, deep down, that they had made a lasting difference. Adrian stood by her side, his expression a mix of awe and satisfaction, his hands still resting near hers. He could feel the change in the air as well. The oppressive weight that had once burdened them was gone, replaced by an almost tangible lightness. His heart swelled with pride as he realized that they had not only restored the reef, but had forged a new future for it, free from the shadows of the past. He had come to this place with a purpose, but now, with the ritual completed and the curse lifted, he felt an overwhelming sense of accomplishment. The world around them was calm, the once turbulent waters now flowing peacefully, as if the reef itself was breathing a sigh of relief. "We've done more than we could have imagined," Adrian said softly, his voice filled with admiration. "And we did it together." As they made their way back through the chasm, the contrast between the journey's beginning and its end was striking. The violent currents that had once fought them now seemed like distant memories, replaced by the gentle flow of water that guided them forward. The oppressive darkness that had clung to the depths had dissipated, leaving behind an eerie, tranquil light that shimmered through the chasm's towering walls. The very essence of the waters had changed. What had once felt like an intimidating and treacherous place now felt peaceful, almost serene. As they moved through the calmer depths, the weight of their mission's success settled into their bones, lifting the exhaustion that had plagued them throughout their journey. Serena moved beside Adrian, her every step reflecting the deep sense of relief that had washed over her. The sense of accomplishment was palpable, and she couldn't help but let out a quiet sigh as she took in the transformation around them. The heart of the chasm, once a place of sorrow and darkness, now seemed full of possibility. The heart of the reef had been restored, and with it, the balance that had been lost for so long. Serena's thoughts lingered on the toll the curse had taken, both on the reef and on herself. But now there was no fear or dread, only the quiet satisfaction of having done what they had set out to accomplish. She glanced over at Adrian, her gaze filled with gratitude. Together, they had faced the impossible and emerged victorious. Adrian, too, felt the shift in the chasm as they made their way back. The journey had been grueling, filled with moments of doubt and uncertainty. But now, there was only the comforting certainty that they had succeeded. He could feel the peacefulness in the water, a reflection of their own inner peace. The chasm, once a symbol of darkness and danger, now seemed like a space for renewal and growth. As the two of them moved through the now calmed waters, Adrian's heart swelled with pride, not just for what they had achieved, but for the bond they had forged along the way. With the curse broken and the reef restored, their future together felt more certain, and he knew, without a doubt, that this was just the beginning of their shared journey. The journey through the abyssal chasm had tested Adrian and Serena in ways they had never imagined. The swirling currents, the oppressive darkness, and the constant struggle to maintain their focus had pushed them to the brink of exhaustion. Yet, despite the overwhelming challenges, they had not faltered. Their perseverance had carried them through each obstacle, their courage never wavering even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Every step they took in the treacherous depths had been a testament to their strength, both individually and as a team. Now, As they moved through the chasm's calmer waters, the weight of their success began to sink in. They had faced the heart of the curse and had emerged victorious, stronger than they had been before. With the curse lifted, a profound sense of relief settled over them. The heart of the reef, once tainted by dark magic, was now on the path to recovery. Serena felt a deep sense of fulfillment as the once turbulent waters around them began to show signs of healing. The waters, which had been a symbol of suffering for so long, were now clear and full of life once more. She could sense the ripple of positive change, not only within the reef itself but also within herself. The fear and uncertainty that had weighed on her for so long were finally gone, replaced by a quiet confidence. The knowledge that they had restored balance to the heart of the reef filled her with an unshakable sense of accomplishment. It was a turning point, both for the reef and for them. Adrian looked over at Serena, his heart swelling with pride and gratitude. Their journey had not only been a physical challenge, but an emotional one as well. The bond they had forged during their quest was now stronger than ever. They had faced their fears, confronted the darkness that had consumed the reef, and emerged victorious. The Heartstone, once a mysterious and powerful artifact, now symbolized their triumph. As they moved closer to the surface, Adrian couldn't help but reflect on how far they had come. They had not only saved the reef but had also found a deeper connection with each other. The path ahead was still uncertain, but one thing was clear: together, they could face whatever challenges awaited them. The journey through the abyssal chasm had been the beginning of something much larger, and Adrian was ready to face the future with Serena by his side. As they emerged from the depths of the abyssal chasm, the first light of dawn filtered through the water, casting a soft, golden glow over the reef. The once turbulent waters now appeared serene, as if the entire ocean was taking a deep, collective breath. The vibrant colors of the coral and the playful movement of sea creatures seemed to pulse with renewed energy, a visible sign that the heart of the reef was healing. The weight of their journey hung in the air, but there was a sense of peace and accomplishment between Adrian and Serena. They had succeeded in breaking the curse, and for the first time in what felt like forever, the reef seemed to shimmer with life. The moment was fleeting, but it was enough to reaffirm their hope. Despite their triumph, the knowledge that their task was far from complete loomed over them. The ritual had been a crucial step in restoring balance to the heart of the reef, but the final steps were just as important. Serena's mind raced with thoughts of what came next. The Heartstone, now a symbol of their success, had to be returned to its rightful place, and they needed to ensure that the forces of dark magic did not resurface. The reef had been left vulnerable for too long, and the stability they had worked so hard to restore could be threatened if the final stages of their journey were not carried out with precision and care. There was no room for error, and a sense of urgency was palpable in Serena's chest. Adrian, sensing her unspoken concern, met her gaze with quiet determination. Their work was not yet finished, but they were ready for whatever lay ahead. The journey had forged a bond between them, one that had been tested and strengthened by every trial they had faced. Now, standing together on the threshold of the final steps, they shared a mutual understanding of what was at stake. With the Heartstone securely in hand, they would return it to its sacred resting place, ensuring that the curse would remain broken for good. The sun's rising rays bathed them in light, casting away the shadows of the past and offering a glimpse of the future that awaited them, one full of hope, yet still demanding the bravery and resilience they had cultivated together. With the dawn's first light illuminating the reef around them, Adrian and Serena stood side by side, a silent understanding passing between them. Their journey had been long and fraught with peril, but they had come this far together, each challenge only serving to deepen their connection. The weight of their mission had brought them closer, and now, with the curse lifted and the heart of the reef on the path to recovery, they felt an unspoken strength in their unity. There was no turning back, no room for doubt. The final steps of their quest loomed before them, and they knew that only through perseverance and unwavering trust in each other could they ensure their success. As they gathered their remaining supplies and prepared for the journey ahead, Serena's thoughts were focused on the task at hand. The Heartstone had played a crucial role in the ritual, but now it was time to place it back where it truly belonged, in the sacred heart of the reef. The magical forces they had encountered were powerful, and they understood the importance of completing the restoration with care and precision. Yet, in the midst of the uncertainty, Serena found a quiet sense of peace in Adrian's steady presence. She knew that together, they were stronger than any force they might face. Their bond, forged through hardship and triumph, was the foundation that would carry them through the final leg of their mission. Adrian, too, felt the weight of their shared resolve. The path ahead was still fraught with risks, but the clarity of their purpose and the depth of their commitment to the reef gave him the strength to face whatever challenges awaited. Each step of their journey had been a testament to their resilience, and now, as they prepared to complete what they had started, he knew they were ready. The stakes had never been higher, but their connection, forged in the fires of trial and tempered by trust, gave them the courage they needed to see it through. No matter what lay ahead, Adrian was certain that together, they would restore the heart of the reef and protect it for generations to come.